The action takes place in a school where martial arts have been taught for more than 50 years. There were many students in the schoolyard. Everyone was staring at someone and whispering to each other. An expensive car was parked nearby, from which the security got out and began to disperse the crowd. Then a well-dressed young man got out of the car and headed forward with a smile on his face. It was Shen Xian, the heir to the Shen Corporation. There was gossip in the yard about the fact that he is not very good at studying and should be excluded. But someone said that he is rich, and it is better not to say that in front of him. The bodyguard of the rich young man heard the gossips and was about to stand up for the owner. But the owner stopped him, saying that he had a lot of money, so it did not bother him. But then the boy behind him heard some screams and became interested in what was happening around him. But he did not have time to understand what and why, when a guy flew up to him and collided with him. Both young men fell to the ground, and the guards wanted to run to protect their master, but he waved his hand that it was not worth it. Then someone said that this boy thief and a rich young man offered to help him pay off his debts, which made him angry. Then the thief got up, turned around, and ran from there, pushing aside a crowd of onlookers as he went. The guard again asked his rich man if they should arrest the criminal, but the young man was generous and offered to transfer him a considerable amount of money instead. Then the assistant asked the boss in surprise if he was going to help the poor again, to which Shen replied that his father had many illegitimate children, and they were all brothers and sisters to him, and he especially felt sorry for this thief who had come to such a life. But 2 years later, everything changed, and Shen Xian was already standing and asking to accept him for training in martial arts. The young man boasted that he was finally able to pass the army hand-to-hand combat, and that this was real progress for him. But behind him, he heard someone's voice sarcastically calling him the heir of the Shen Company. It was Cao Tian in an expensive suit, although in the past he was a common thief. The boy had changed a lot and was surrounded by guards, and Shen Qian clearly disliked him. The former thief turned to the young man and called him the former heir of the Shen family. Shen Qian was a little surprised by his half-brother's words when he realized that he was offended by something. The new heir behaved arrogantly and threw a piece of paper on the floor in front of the man. It was a check for 100,000 wen that Tian had received from his relative 2 years ago. Cao looked down on his brother and said insulting things about him, and his guards supported him in everything. When the men led by their master were about to leave, Shen Qian stopped them. The boy turned his head with an evil smile and was ready to hear all sorts of excuses from his brother. But he only reminded that in the past he gave a relative 100,000 more than he is now returning. The rich man was angry and wanted to say something, but the young man remarked with a smile that if he had nothing to repay the debt, he would wait until the next time. At the same moment, the second check also flew to the floor. The boy picked it up and said that this was enough, and he would not take into account the interest accrued over the past 2 years. Then he turned and walked away, waving the hand that held the 2 pieces of paper, and Cao continued to stand and look angrily after his relative and repeat insults to his side. Did the taxi go down the road, moving away from its previous location? Shen Xian was sitting in the back seat of the car, and despite his calm appearance, he was very depressed. The driver asked the young man if he was a master of martial arts, because he graduated from a special school. But the boy replied that he could not be considered a master, because he had not even reached the minimum level. But the driver was still impressed by the young man's confession and said that regardless of the level of training, it is still very good to be a master of martial arts, and that he was not so lucky. The news had just reported that there had been a murder in the park and that the criminal had taken a hostage to be able to escape. The taxi continued to move. The passenger and the driver listened to the crime, and that the killer had a second-level martial art and was very dangerous. Such events greatly shocked both men, especially the level of skill of the criminal. Shen Qian sat in the car and thought about the fact that practicing masters held a higher position in society than ordinary people. But practice requires special talents, And in order to become stronger, you need to practice martial arts on a spiritual level. Techniques and practices complement each other. Hand-to-hand combat is taught in schools, and in order to practice martial arts, you need to enter a university. The young man was upset because he understood that if the criminal is at the second level of practice, then he is much stronger than him. But at that moment, his thoughts were interrupted by the voice of the taxi driver, who said that they had arrived at their destination, and the young man settled with the driver. The man liked Shenqian's house, and he said that his mother left him this house, and because he has no talent for martial arts, the family disowned him, and his father gives him a small amount for living. Now, Cao has become the favorite of the family. In some strange way, 2 years ago he became very strong, although before that he was an ordinary loser. The young man opened the door of the house and, with sadness on his face, thought about how quickly everything had changed. And then he noticed that someone had left footprints on the floor in his house. Shen Qian was confused and thought it was a thief. The guy pulled out a knife because he was very angry. He remembered that he was so short of money. How could someone like him be robbed? But when he came closer, he saw a girl lying on his couch. He did not understand where this stranger came from in his house, but he saw that her hands were tied behind her back. The young man immediately noticed how beautiful this girl was, but immediately scolded himself for his stupid thoughts, because he needed to catch the thief first. But then he thought that it couldn't be just a coincidence, and that he'd better call the police. But he did not have time to do anything, because he saw the shadow of a man in front of him, and realized that it was the criminal who was mentioned in the news. The killer pointed the knife at the young man and warned him not to even think about moving. Otherwise, he would kill him. Very loud sounds were heard from the house, and it became clear that the criminal had harmed the boy. Shen Xian was lying on the floor, wounded and moaning heavily, while the intruder was holding in his hands the checks that he had received from his half-brother today, and was glad that now he would be able to escape with such a sum of money. Then the killer coughed, because the wounds on his body were quite serious, and the fight with the boy was not easy for him. Then the man approached the young man to tie him up, and threatened that if the checks turned out to be invalid, he would return and finish his business. The boy sat tied to a chair and moaned in pain. Blood was flowing down his face. He thought that in a world without physical strength, the only thing left to do is die. He thought that when the killer returned, he would definitely finish him off. But in a moment, he felt some changes in his body. The young man began to hear a voice that told about the Donata system, which is capable of cultivation and chooses the object for this by itself. He could not understand where this voice was coming from and what kind of system it was, but in response, he heard that she was inside his consciousness and had no essence of her own. Shenjian tried to ask where it came from, but all he heard was that it was connected to the master's spirit. The boy also learned that the system was in deep sleep all this time and was accumulating energy for its launch. It turns out that during all 7 years of training, the system absorbed the boy's energy and did not give him the opportunity to express himself. And now, after its launch, there is no need for it to use the master's resource. The young man was happy and asked what advantages this discovery would give him. And he learned that the system has the ability to transform any financial values into cryptocurrency, which is needed to launch chi energy. The second advantage was the ability to cultivate, and that skill the boy had now improved. He also asked about the limitations of this mode and learned that in order to absorb funds, you need to touch them or a bank card, and you also need to have an initial level for further cultivation. Then Shen Qian asked to evaluate his level and found out what funds were needed to advance his abilities. He also noted that if the system had been launched 2 years earlier, he would have become a real master. He still had hope for salvation. He looked at the knife lying nearby and crawled towards it. He recalled how his father found out that he had no talent for martial arts, and how he ordered to test the talents of his other illegitimate children. The young man had almost reached the knife and was determined to prove to everyone that he was not just an ordinary guy, He also remembered all the gossip and talk behind his back that he had failed the entrance exam. Shenxian approached the knife and thought about how he pretended not to care when he really didn't. He constantly tried to prove that he was capable of more and fought with himself. But this was not enough. And after some time, the young man heard bad news from his father's employees. Then he learned that Tian had miraculously improved his abilities and reached a high level in training. Then the father immediately disowned his unfortunate son and found a replacement for him. Shen Xian reached for a knife and cut the rope, realizing that the system that had started would give him many opportunities. The young man was glad that he was able to free himself, but he heard that someone was returning to the house and knew that it was a criminal. He looked around in fright and realized that he would not have time to escape because the killer returned very quickly. Then he took the bank card to which his father transferred money for living and ordered the system to transfer the money to the crypt and increase his combat level. Unfortunately, there was too little money in the account, and it was not enough for promotion. The guy thought about where he should get the money, and then ran to the table and ordered the system to count the coins that were there. But still, he lacked 200 yuan, and the young man did not know where to get them because he had no money left. And then the system noticed a sleeping girl on the sofa. Shen Xian was surprised that he could donate other people's funds to the system, and it turns out that it took some time. Then the boy unbuttoned the girl's blouse without thinking, mentally apologizing for his unworthy act. There was a pocket inside, but it was so tightly sewn that I had to fiddle with it. Finally, the young man found the amount he was missing, and grasping the money, began to hope that the system would have time to accept it. When the criminal entered the room and saw an empty chair, he was very surprised. The man carefully put the bag with money on the ground, and looking around, thought about how the young man could get loose. The killer shouted to the young man to get out, because he saw that he was hiding behind the couch. It took Shenxian very little time, and he decided to distract him with a silly conversation about how he hoped to escape. Rubbing his fists, the criminal laughed and said that he underestimated the boy, because he turned out to be brave. But this still did not prevent the criminal from trying to complete his business. And luckily, the system managed to convert the funds. The killer began to move towards the young man with rage in his eyes and the intention to kill him. And Shen Qian, in turn, mentally ordered the system to raise his combat level and rushed into battle. The opponents hit each other so hard that they could barely hold on and not fall. When the fight ended, the killer was disappointed and stunned that the young man was able to fight him off. Shen Qian, with a smile on his bloodied face, was satisfied that he had managed to upgrade his martial art after all. The attacker was angry. He did not expect that the boy was hiding his strength. The man thought that the young man had deliberately shown weakness to confuse him and lower his attention, and he almost succeeded. But despite the improvement of skills, the boy still could not defeat the criminal. Then the young man turned to the killer and said that he did not need to fight anymore because he was already wounded and that he still got the money. The man agreed with the boy, saying that his proposal was very reasonable, but if it were not for the injury, he would have killed him. Shunqian happily waved at the uninvited guest and said he would not call the police. But the killer did not like the young man's bargaining. He was angry that he dared to talk to him like that. The man became very angry and attacked Shenxian with great speed, striking him. The boy did not expect such a sudden attack and only coughed when he was wounded in the neck. The villain rushed at the boy again, shouting insults at him, and this time the boy was ready. Shenxian headbutted the attacker in the stomach with all his might, causing him to cough. The man paused, not expecting such a turn of events, and the young man thought that hand-to-hand combat still has benefits. But this did not stop the killer, but only made him angrier. He spread his arms and showed his fingers like claws, saying that it was time to show the real martial art. Shenxian was no joke when he realized that he was going to use a hawk strike. The young man also decided to use force and swung at the opponent, but he was too slow, and at the same moment the killer was behind the boy. The criminal hit Shenxian in the back so hard that blood spurted from his mouth. The boy flew to the far corner of the room and hit the wall, but the attacker realized that due to the use of this skill, an old wound had opened in him, and he would not be able to fight at full strength now. And looking at the exhausted young man, the killer thought that he was finished with him and that he was no longer a threat. But at that moment, the system detected the money that had fallen out of the bag and offered the young man to top up the account, to which he agreed. Shenxian touched the scattered bills, and the conversion began immediately. The boy began to gain strength and stand up, and the attacker could not believe his eyes and did not understand where the money he was going to take had gone. The young man laughed, saying that he had used all the money. Then the assailant got angrier and started shouting for him to give it back. But Shenxian said that they belonged to him, and at that very moment his body began to transform. The system withdrew 100,000 wen and raised the young man's martial skill level to advanced. At the same moment, the girl who was lying on the sofa began to regain consciousness. She saw the killer attacking the young man and shouted a warning in fear. Both fighters threw their fists forward, intending to strike each other. The attacker shouted threats at the young man and said that nothing could match the speed of his combat equipment. But Shen Qian struck him at the same moment. The man did not expect this, and with a hole in his chest, he spoke his last words in a trembling voice. And the young man, with a sly smile, thought that it was precisely thanks to the fact that the criminal brought money that this victorious match took place. The man was lying in the middle of the room, with a dent on his chest from the boy's fist, and did not move. The girl was very happy that she was saved and offered her rescuer any help, and the young man asked if she had any money. She looked at him with a confused look and could not utter a word. But the young man replied that if she has no money, it doesn't matter what she wants to tell him. But at that moment, the young man was overcome by a strange feeling. He fell to his knees and could not understand what was happening, and the girl wanted to help him. Shenqian realized that he could not control his urge and grabbed the hand of the frightened girl. The young man looked at the beauty with an interested look and asked if she really agreed to everything he asked. The girl agreed to the young man's proposal, but after a while she regretted it. And the young man felt very hungry. He began to eat like crazy. The beauty did not have time to bring him plates. She watched as the boy stuffed himself with rice and said that she was hoping for another offer from him. And finally, he was full, and the girl said that it was the first time she had seen him so hungry. The young man answered her that this had never happened to him before. Shenxian then walked over to the scoundrel's body lying on the floor and sat down next to it. When the beauty asked what he was going to do, he answered that he wanted to get rid of the corpse and whether she wanted to help him in this. But the girl said that she would rather go wash the dishes. The young man decided to search the scoundrel's pockets. He knew that the criminal had no money, but maybe he had some other valuable things. And then the boy took out a book that taught the technique of a bloody blow of a hawk, and was very happy. He immediately asked the system how much it would cost him to own this technique, but she replied that she could not estimate it because its owner was unfamiliar with this art. The young man decided to postpone this book until he could own it, and then asked the system why he was so hungry. It turns out that although he reduced the time to master skills, the energy he spent needs to be replenished regularly. Otherwise, it will run out. After hearing this, the young man concluded that a rapid jump in cultivation could lead to death, and was upset about it. In the future, he was going to be more careful not to hurt himself during such rapid cultivation, and asked the system what would happen if he tried to cultivate to a perfect level now. She replied that there are not enough funds in the account for such a jump, but if it happens, Shun Qian may die due to lack of energy. The young man looked at his hands and understood that he needed to stock up on high-calorie food to support his body. And then he thought that he still didn't have enough money and was very sorry for being poor. Then the young man began to think about what he should do with the body of this criminal, because it would not be good if someone saw him. But at the same moment, Special Forces fighters broke into the house, pointed their weapons at the people present, and ordered them not to move. Shen Qian was confused, and the girl also came to see what happened. The soldiers arrested the young man, thinking that he was an accomplice of the criminal, and decided to take his girlfriend to the police station as well. After everything was revealed, the young man received high praise for his actions because he was able to detain such a dangerous villain. Shen once again asked if everything was in order and was told that they were obliged to reward him for helping the police. The boy was given a document to sign, which indicated the amount of the reward. But the boy refused to sign and began to convince the organ worker that he had a very hard time in the fight with the scoundrel. The man listened intently to the young man while he described the situation and tried to convince that he acted solely for the safety of those around him. And then he finished his story by asking for an increase in the amount of the reward. The servant of law and order replied that he had to consult with his superiors, and he himself thought that the boy was very mercantile. Then the man looked at the girl who was standing next to him and decided to apologize to her for the fact that she had to be a hostage. But she replied that she did not hold any grudge. But the man insisted that the girl ask for help if she needed anything. Then she first thought, and then shouted that she also needed a reward, and nothing else. The organ worker was not too happy with such demands, and could not do anything about it. Shen Qian and his new girlfriend left the branch after receiving their money, but the boy was a little disappointed with the amount he got. Then he turned to his companion and asked why she was still following him, since she had received her reward. Then the girl looked at him with a confused look and said that he took 300 wen from her and still hasn't returned it. Shen Xian answered her that he saved her life, that she was really sorry for the money, but the girl said that she earned it too hard and that he should not think badly of her. Then the guy's phone rang. He picked up the phone and started talking to someone who was very worried. The voice on the other end of the receiver tried to convince the young man to bow to his half-brother, but Shen Xian was not going to do so, assuring the interlocutor that he was fine. Then he said that he didn't need help from the person who sided with his enemy, and hung up. The beauty asked the boy if it was his friend calling, but he answered that it was a former friend. Then the young man returned to the girl and offered her a job, but she replied that she did not want to do anything illegal. She asked the new acquaintance what he planned to do next, and he said he needed to find some information. It was very early. The city was just beginning to wake up. The first passers-by began to appear on the street. Wu Chijin stood and waited for the young man, worried that he had deceived her and would not come. But in a moment, she heard the boy's voice. He did come, but he was quite late. The girl decided not to pay attention to this shortcoming of the young man and asked him about the work he promised her, and he replied that they had just arrived. The girl saw a beautiful palace in front of her and could not believe her eyes. Shen Qian admitted that he was the son of the owner of this house, but the girl did not believe him, saying that he was too insignificant for the son of a rich man. There were a lot of beautifully dressed people in the yard. They all came to the party, organized by the young man's half-brother. The crowd of men were just now discussing the party and the fact that Tian wanted to show off his new level of cultivation. An expensive car was parked near the palace, and a beautifully dressed girl, accompanied by a bodyguard, got out of it. Shen pointed out to his friend, a security guard who had guests passing by and needed help to get inside, but she didn't understand why he couldn't get in the usual way if he was the owner's son. Then the guy said that he would pay her 500 wen, more than they agreed, and the beauty agreed to help him. The security guard was about to close the door because all the guests were inside, and then he heard some screams that a dog had run into the yard. The girl worriedly ran up to the man and began to explain that it was her puppy, and she saw how it entered the palace. The guard started to argue with the beauty and tried to kick her out, and Shen had already gone around him from behind to get inside. The girl insisted that she be allowed to look for the dog, but the man blocked her way. Meanwhile, while the worker was distracted, the young man quietly carried out his plan. He put on a hood so that he would not be recognized and headed towards the house past the guests who were outside. Ahead of him, he saw two men gossiping about the new heir being a martial arts genius, and the elder had been chased away. The young man was saddened to hear such a conversation, but then he heard someone shout that Cao Tian had arrived. Then he saw in front of him a stage with a microphone, and his half-brother standing proudly with his hands in his pants pockets. Cao went to the microphone and gave a speech in which he thanked everyone present, But people were skeptical and did not really believe his words. The young man also announced that the Shen Corporation was going to cooperate with the Li Yang Corporation and asked his special guest to advise him on the matter. There were whispers in the crowd about the new collaboration, and one member of the audience turned to Miss Lion. One of the workers approached the girl and offered her to answer something to the words of their master, but she was gathering her thoughts in the meantime. At that very moment, she heard someone address Tyann, and was stunned to see who it was. The one from the stage asked who said it. The crowd also returned in search of that brave man. Behind them stood a hooded Shen with his hands in his pockets, attracting the attention of everyone present. His half-brother recognized the young man and raised his eyebrows, and a special guest, Lian, was also interested in the boy. Then the young man took off his hood and asked his relative for a small favor. The guests immediately recognized the boy and began to whisper and watch what would happen next. And Shen Xian continued his comedy, telling how hard it had been for him lately while addressing the new heir. But he was not happy about the presence of his relative and angrily asked how he was able to enter. The young man was quickly approached by the guards, who received an order to catch the uninvited guest. Then Shin-chan realized that it was worth running away. He quickly ran, and the men in uniform ran after him. The young man quickly jumped on the table, scaring the guests, and shouted insults at his half-relative. The guard ordered his men to surround the boy so that he could not escape. But he continued to run along the long table, thinking that his brother had turned out to be even that scoundrel. The guests present watched this spectacle and seemed to be satisfied with what was happening. Cao was very angry, but he understood that Shen did not just come and make this scene. When the guards were ready to arrest the uninvited guest, the owner ordered them to stop. Cao, with a displeased expression on his face, asked his brother what he needed from him. The young man was glad that the chase was over, because he was very tired and panting from such running around the tables. He pretended to believe in the goodness of his brother, and began to talk nonsense about how he looked after him as a child. Cao was furious. He clenched his fists and once again asked his relative what he needed. Shen was waiting for this. He began to talk about the fact that he has a lot of debt, and that he does not even have enough to buy food. Then he added a fictional story about a collector who threatened to break his legs. Then the brother asked how much money he needed. The young man jumped up for joy and began to praise your relative and his kindness. And then he added that he needed 2 million yuan. The new heir was not happy with such a request and thought that if it were not for the large number of guests present, he would have beaten the boy. He understood that Shen deliberately arranged everything in front of those present, because he would not dare to humiliate the honor of the family and go to a conflict with his brother. Afterwards, Cao smiled and apologized to the audience for the improper upbringing of some family members. He then jumped on the table and wrote a check for 500,000, thinking that this should be enough for his brother to live normally in this world. Shen was disappointed with such a sum and called the relative stingy. But he did not fall for the provocation and told the young man what to choose. Cao Tiana pointedly threw the written check at his brother's feet in front of all the guests present. The boys looked at each other. Shen was very angry and Cao was beaming a victorious smile. The young man continued to look unsatisfiedly at his brother and at the paper with the amount lying on the table in front of him. And then he said with a smile that he couldn't hold anything securely in his hands and bent down to pick up the check, which he still decided to take. The boy also said that such valuable things as a check should not be spoiled, and Cao praised him for deciding to take the money. He placed his hand on Shayna's shoulder and squeezed it with extreme force, his gaze directed directly at his brother. The boy did not expect such a force that was pressing on him. The table broke under him from the way Cao held him tightly. Shen thought that such skill was to be expected from the third cultivation level that his brother possessed. The young man looked up and said that 500,000 was not worth spoiling such a good table. Then Cao let him go, laughed and said he just decided to give him a massage. But the brother did not agree with this statement, holding his shoulder and barely standing on his feet. The new heir said that since the boy had taken the money, it was time for him to go, and Shen didn't mind. The young man turned and walked away, waving the check, saying goodbye not to be escorted. An employee of Kaotian approached the owner and offered to deal with the guy who constantly demands money. But he dissuaded them from such an act and ordered to remove the broken table and continue the party. But he thought to himself that it was impossible to get money from him so easily, and Shen must have regretted it. A cow blow, wherever it is struck, affects the very heart, and the young man is unlikely to be able to train now after such a thing. Shen left the palace grounds and breathed a sigh of relief, hoping that no one noticed that he had become stronger in martial arts. He was glad that he was able to get the money and hoped that his brother did not suspect anything and that he would now be able to defeat him. But the boy's thoughts were interrupted by a voice that asked if he got the information he needed. It was the beauty who helped him enter the palace. She was very cold, waiting for the boy, and thought that he had left her. But the young man said that he did not have such a habit of letting people down and paid her the promised money. The girl was very happy and finally believed that Shen was really the son of a rich man. But then the girl remembered that the young man still owed her the money he took while she was unconscious, and they went on the road arguing about who was stingy and who owed what to whom. Then the events unfolded at Yanbei High School. At that moment, the bell rang for recess, and the schoolyard began to fill with students. Children ran quickly, catching up with each other to look at some special sight. It turns out that it was a selection for an elite class of martial arts, during which sparring was held. The young man with blue hair tried to beat his opponent and used all his skill that he was capable of. But he failed to do anything because he was too slow, and by the time his fist reached the target, his opponent had already left his place. The coach, with whom the boy was sparring, pointed out to him the weak points due to which it was not possible to achieve the desired effect. And then, with all his might, he kicked him hard in the stomach, putting all his anger into him. The young man flew to the far corner and hit the wall. He was defeated and unconscious. The judges called the next student, and one of them asked the principal if it was too much for the teacher to conduct the selection himself. At that very moment, a team of doctors was taking away a wounded boy who could not pass the selection for training. The selection rules changed when one of the students tried to bribe opponents. 2 years ago, Shen Qian paid all of his sparring partners to surrender in battle and give him a chance to qualify. But the young man turned out to be too weak and did not even pass basic training, which became a great shame for the school, and now all selections are conducted by the teacher personally. The entrance to the high school was guarded by a man who liked to sleep on the job, even though he had a second level of martial arts training. Shen Qian decided to take advantage of the employee's oversight and enter the school grounds. But the young man was not careful enough and still woke up the guard, who decided that someone was skipping class. But when he went outside, he saw a student Lian in front of him. The girl apologized for disturbing the man, but he did not get angry and asked if she had passed the selection to the elite class, and Shen was watching all of this. The man said goodbye to the student and went to his workplace, and the young man who was hiding all the time breathed a sigh of relief. He thanked the girl for not betraying him in front of the guard, and she asked if he was going to be selected this year for the elite class. Shen said he was just hoping to try his luck, but Lian pointed out that the rules had changed this year, and he wouldn't be able to bribe anyone anymore. But the boy assured her that he was going to fight fair. The girl turned to leave and said that she would wait for him in class, and the young man thought that she had helped him again, and he had never repaid her. But then he remembered why he came and rushed to run quickly so as not to lose the opportunity. The teacher who conducted the selection asked if there were still people willing to try their hand at admission. But the students were too frightened by the way he behaved in the ring and did not want to repeat the fate of the losers. The coach said that this year's course is the worst he has seen during his teaching career. And then he added that since there are no more willing to test their strength, the exam can be considered finished. But someone interrupted him, and the man was very surprised, not expecting such a turn of events. The students were also confused and began to look at each other, looking for who this daredevil was. Everyone then saw Shen enter the room and said that he wanted to try out for the selection. Every student of the school knew about this young man. His story was used by teachers to warn others not to make mistakes. The director could not stand him and said that if it were not for the rules, he would be ready to kill him. The guy entered the room, raised his hand high, and said that he would like to participate. The director recognized him and angrily asked what he was going to throw out this time. To which the young man replied that he considered him a pensioner and was surprised that he was still here. Then the man became even more angry, and one of the teachers even had to hold him. The students already understood who this brave boy was and began to gossip and discuss his arrival. Shen was also recognized by the trainer who was conducting the selection and looked at the boy with his stern gaze. The young man noted that after graduating from school, he became very popular, as everyone present knows his name. The director asked why he came, because he's already a graduate. Then he replied that he wanted to participate to enter the elite class. But the principal was indignant and told him not to even dream about it, and the teacher, sitting next to him, began to calm him down again. But Shen insisted, saying that he had the right to re-enroll. The headmaster was relentless. He did not want to allow the young man to participate, and said that the school was for martial arts, not for those who do nonsense. The young man threatened to go to the top management. A voice from the hall interrupted his thoughts. Someone said that the young man was allowed to participate, and his words surprised both the boy and the director. It was a coach. He said that he had also heard about the young man, but had not had the opportunity to meet him before. The teacher said that he despised people like him, and that today he would like to let him know everything he thinks about him. Then the man began to talk disparagingly about the young man, and he looked at him with a look full of anger. Rumors had already begun to spread among the students that Shen must have wanted to bribe someone again, because he had come here. But the young man only smiled at the teacher's words and offered him a match if he was so sure of his words. The coach was surprised by such an offer, and the young man continued and said that he was ready to bet for money. The young man suggested that if he passed the selection, the teacher would owe him 10,000, but the man just smiled and asked what would happen if he lost. Shen then took out 100,000 from his pocket and said that if he did not pass, he would pay the coach exactly that amount. The other students in the room were very surprised, and the director was angry and asked if the young man understood where he was if he offered such conditions. Then he turned to the coach and said that he forbids him to participate in this pair, but he replied that he agreed, and that he was ready to pay himself if he won. The man added that he cannot refuse even if the boy changes his mind on his own. Then another teacher told the principal that the coach could not fall face down in the dirt in front of so many students looking at him, so he would have to accept the offer. The director exhaled. He had no choice but to agree. He only asked to control the power so as not to cause too much damage to the opponent, and the trainer promised. Then he turned to the young man and asked if he understood that his strength was too small compared to the strength of the instructor. But he said that he is responsible for his actions and that there is no need to worry about him. And then he approached the ring. Everyone present was focused on what was happening, and the young man's girlfriend was very intrigued by his act, but noted that it was in his style to make a fuss about his return. Both opponents stood in the ring, in front of each other, ready to start. The judge started the countdown and waved his hand. The instructor and the young man looked at each other, their expressions showing their determination. Lian stood and looked at what was happening, and understood that the young man would not be able to win in any case. The teacher had already started using the first technique. He was very fast. His hands were changing positions at a crazy speed. The director and his assistant were a little confused that the instructor used a very serious technique first. The battle began, and his opponent with his equipment began to move towards the young man. Shen noted that it was very fast, but still managed to parry the first blow. The other students were stunned by the fact that the young man managed to block the instructor's reception. Even the teacher himself noticed and emphasized the special attentiveness of the boy. Shen began challenging the trainer to use something stronger on him, and the man remarked that he shouldn't be so arrogant. But the young man replied that since he despised him, he had no choice but to behave. Reciprocally, Lion saw what the young man was doing and thought that he was trying in vain to get the examiner out of himself. But the instructor was ready to use a new technique and quickly stood up. The assistant director, with horror in his eyes, realized what trick the examiner wanted to use. And the director noted that this technique is designed for strength, and it will be very difficult for the opponent to block the blow. The teacher approached the principal and said that this technique exceeded the grade requirements, but the principal replied that the young man had to be reprimanded for his arrogance. The examiner had already applied his technique and began to quickly attack the boy. Shen saw the technique that was being used against him and realized that his skill in hand-to-hand combat could help him in this fight. The boy thought that hand-to-hand combat was underrated, but he was an exception to the rule because he trained a lot. Then he raised his hand against the opponent's blow. The young man grabbed the coach's hand during the kick, and he definitely did not expect that this could happen. Shen pushed the opponent aside and realized that he had a chance to win. Lian was stunned by what she saw. She couldn't believe her eyes. The teacher of the admission committee shouted when he saw how the young man beat the instructor's technique. The director also could not believe what was happening. It was very spectacular. The man noted about himself that the young man's level of hand-to-hand combat turned out to be very complex and advanced. The instructor was also surprised at the boy's level of training, and Shen said that they really thought he was incapable of learning martial arts. The boy stood up and said that he knew about the gossip behind his back. But besides the couple, he also wanted to prove that all the men in his family were honest and brave. And the boy began to demand the instructor to use his strongest technique, and the observers were stunned by what he was capable of. Then the young man reminded the coach that he could win 100,000 from him, and he apologized for the prejudice he had against the boy. The examiner was already preparing to use his strongest blow, which he only had for the first level, but the headmaster jumped up from his seat and started yelling at the teacher not to do anything stupid. The assistant reminded that the coach is doing this because of the money he wants to receive, because his wife receives his salary instead. The man also added that the best way to win for the instructor is to use this technique. The director was in despair. The examiner shouted an apology to the young man, and still used his technique with which he could neutralize the enemy. Shen saw a determined coach in front of him, and in a moment he lowered his punch to where the young man was standing. The examination board jumped up from what they saw. Lian was also frightened and looked confused at what was happening. But in a moment, the young man clapped his hands and praised the instructor for his skills, saying that he was very scared, but luckily he was able to react in time. The audience could not believe their eyes. The students began to ask each other whether the young man was really able to deflect from the instructor's blow. The coach was stunned and disappointed at the same time, and the young man asked if he had passed the selection because he had withstood 3 shots. The examiner was angry. He believed that the young man would not deviate, but he said that he was just joking. Then the trainer reminded the young man that he was going to prove the dignity of the men of his family. But Shen replied that he was disowned, so now it doesn't matter. Lian was also disappointed. She really hoped that the boy had changed. But the coach called him a liar and offered to take another hit, which the boy agreed to. The man was very surprised that the boy did not mind, but he said that the amount they had bet increased to 100,000 if the examiner lost. Of course, he was angry, but he agreed. But the director approached the young man and said that according to the rules, he won. The coach wanted to argue with the boss, but he urged him to be smart and set the right example for the students. The instructor was forced to agree and bowed his head, and the director continued, saying that the bet they bet on would disgrace the reputation of the school and suspended the coach from work, and the young man was going to be fined 50,000. The guy got angry and started shouting back that he was making money with his skills. But the boss put his hand on his shoulder and told him to calm down. He leaned over to the boy and said that the coach would teach in the elite class in the future, and that the boy had better back off, because he would be studying there. Shen was very happy and agreed with what the principal told him. saying that there should be no disagreements between students and teachers. Finally, the young man could exhale calmly. He rubbed his bruised hands, and at that moment the coach called him. The man said that he was ready to lose and asked for the account number to which the money should be transferred. Shen didn't make him wait long. He already had a number written down, which he handed to the coach. He looked at the piece of paper and said that he would take care of the young man after the beginning of the school year. The boy was a little desperate because he managed to make an enemy before even starting his studies. The next day, Shen came to school and cautiously opened the classroom door. And for good reason, because at that moment a bucket of water, which someone had prepared for him, fell on the floor. The young man noted that it was very naive because such an act looked childish. His classmates were not very happy with him. They called the boy a coward. The students believed that someone like him did not belong in an elite class. Everyone made fun of him, and some accused him of having suspended the teacher from teaching. The young man went to his place, and when he moved the chair, he saw that it was broken. But behind him, he heard the voice of a girl who invited him to sit next to her. He said that Leon is as good as before, and asked her for forgiveness. A teacher entered the class and said that he would replace the suspended one, and the young man asked the girl why she was talking to him, to which she replied that she was an outcast anyway, so she didn't care. Then the boy treated her with understanding, and the girl greeted him in the classroom, and they shook hands. Shen was walking home late at night, puddles on the road, and his hair wet from the rain. He was very tired and could hardly climb the stairs to the door. When he entered, he threw his backpack on the couch. The young man sat down, held his head, and thought about the fact that his new class was a real nightmare. He remembered how many textbooks were given to him in order for him to make up for missed lessons. The teacher praised him for his high practical skills, but reminded him that they need to be constantly honed with theoretical knowledge, for which the young man promised to study well. Shen took out the books and realized that there was a lot of homework and that he needed help with it. But at that moment, there was a knock on the door. He went to open it, not understanding who could come to visit at such a time, and behind the door stood his old acquaintance, begging for help. The guy was confused when he saw the girl, but she pushed him away, running into the house, and said that someone was chasing her. The beauty grabbed the young man's sleeve and began to beg him to protect her from her pursuers. At the same moment, there was another knock on the door. The girl put her finger to her lips and quickly hid. There were 4 men standing in the doorway, and Shen opened the door and started yelling at them for disturbing the peace at such a late hour. The men were stocky. They said they were looking for a student and saw that she ran to this house. But the boy decided to pretend that he did not understand what it was about and said that they wanted to deceive him. Then, one of the men leaned over to the chief and said that this house looked very rich and that it was better not to cause trouble to such people. Their leader politely turned to the young man and explained that this girl owed them a debt. But Shen again pretended that he did not understand what he was doing here and added that he was not going to help the poor. Then the chief agreed with the boy and apologized for the late visit, and when they turned to leave, he ordered his men to check on this young man to decide what to do next. When Shen closed the door, the girl looked out from the shelter and wondered if the men had left. Then the young man turned to her and asked what was happening, to which the girl replied that it was all her father's fault. She said that her dad likes to gamble and has a lot of debt, and this time he owed money to very powerful people. They broke into the house when the father was not at home and began to demand that the girl pay for him. Nevertheless, she managed to escape, but the men rushed after her. The girl apologized for dragging him into this and offered to tell the men next time that she was just a thief. Then she added that she would find a way to pay off her father's debts. When the girl was about to leave, Shen called her, asking where she had gathered in the middle of the night, and thus surprised her. The young man said that she was not obliged to pay her father's debt and that it was better for her to stay with him for a while. The girl was very happy with such an offer. But the young man added that nothing comes for free and she will have to pay for accommodation, which made the girl very scared. But it turned out that she misunderstood the young man. He wanted something else from her, The boy folded his arms over his chest and said that from now on she would have to help him with his homework. In the palace where Shen once lived, the new heir was talking to his assistant, who informed him that his brother had been accepted into the elite class. Then the boy decided that the money his relative took from him was used for bribery. The next day, the three boys discussed what they would need to do to appease Cao Tian, as they knew about the old conflict with their brother. The head of their company noted that Shen is not worthy of this surname, because he is a loser who could not succeed in training. The boy planned something bad, and his loyal henchmen supported this initiative. They discussed how exactly they could kill the poor thing in order to get a reward from their master. But their conversation was interrupted by Shen saying that he did not expect such activity from them. The young man suggested that they find a quieter place in order to sort things out once and for all. The boys said that this was the only place without CCTV cameras, and that they could beat him to death right now without anyone knowing. Shen pretended to be very scared, and one of the enemies said that it was his own fault and should not have come here. But the young man explained that he meant something completely different, and if there are no video surveillance cameras here, then he cannot hold back and immediately got into a combat stance. Everything happened very quickly. At the end, the boy rubbed his hands, and three of his opponents were lying on the ground with a request not to beat them again. Then he went up to the leader, who was opposed to him, and put his foot on his forehead, and he began to beg to let them go, and assured that he would bypass the young man in the 10th way. But Shen disagreed with them, saying that they were classmates and they would have to see each other. But he thought of something else and smiled. The boy took money from them, but it turned out to be very little. Then one of the trio offered him a pill of bloody qi. The young man put everything in his pocket, waved at them, and told them not to rush to class, and that from now on they were good friends. When he left, one of the company turned to the leader and asked how they should deal with the boy. Why, he replied that he knew a way to drive him out of school. The three of them put on the most miserable looks and entered the principal's office to complain about Shen. But the young man was ahead of them. He turned on the director's recording, where he could hear them discussing the attack on him. Then the director turned to the boys and forced them to explain what was happening. And they began to make excuses and say that they were mistaken and that it was not Shen who beat them. After some time, the same company already apologized to the young man and tried to appease him. Then the boy assured them that he did not hold a grudge against them, but they would have to show their good intentions, and he stretched out his palm and rubbed his fingers to make it clear that he needed money. But then another student came up and apologized on behalf of all his classmates for the insults. The young man was surprised by this apology, because he had never seen this boy. But one of the bullies explained that it was Qijan, and he was the best student in the class, and that the top 3 students are allowed to miss class every day. The boy then explained that he had spoken to the students and they would no longer bully the newcomer, and Shen was not happy because he did not want to be associated with this boy. Also, the best student pointed out the trio of bullies, apologized for them, and asked the young man not to bully them anymore. Then Shen raised his hand and said that he forgives them. He himself thought that he should not cross the path of this Chajan, because maybe he is one of the pagans. After lunch at the training base, the young man heard how the instructor promised to give a recovery pill to those who will be among the top 3 students in the monthly exam, and decided that he really needed this pill. The boy was thinking about how he should be in order to take possession of her, and at that moment, another student approached him. Shen tensed when he recognized this student and asked what he needed from him. In the days when the young man was still the heir, this fool was constantly around him and served him, and after Tyan took his place, he took his side. The student said he heard about the boy's success in martial arts and offered sparring. But Shen wasn't going to fight him. Instead, he called out to an older student in the class he saw nearby. He turned his attention to the young man and asked what he needed, and the young man pushed his former friend in his direction and said that he wanted to get some advice from him. And while Chajan, with a smile on his face, kindly communicated with his classmate, Shen quickly ran away. He came to the teacher's office and wanted to take a few days off to prepare for the exams and spend less time seeing his enemies who served Taian. The young man pretended to be sick and said that he needed 2 days to rest, and the teacher kindly agreed, saying that he had seen his progress in studies and thought that he had changed. But then he took out a huge pile of letters and told the frightened young man that he would have to do more tasks. Then Shen realized that the girl who helped him with the tasks did everything without mistakes. When the guy came home, he found his girlfriend sleeping over a pile of books. The young man came closer to her and decided not to wake her, hoping that she would appreciate his kind gesture. Instead, he covered her with a blanket. It was already late at night when the girl woke up. She realized that Shen had already returned, but she did not see him anywhere. Uchijin went out into the courtyard and saw him training. She immediately knew that he was practicing the Bloody Hawk strike. Coming closer, she saw that his movements looked quite strange, and the boy himself realized that something was wrong, because his technique was not at all like that of the criminal. The friend turned to him and said that he was doing very badly. Then the young man turned and asked what she was talking about. But this time, the girl refused her words. But he did not get angry because of her frankness, but on the contrary, asked her to explain. Then the beauty replied that it seemed to her that his movements were not skillful enough, and her friend began to explain to him how to put his feet and raise his elbows so that he would be more comfortable. But this did not help the young man. He was not comfortable, and he practically lost his strength, and the girl begged him to hold on a little longer. The boy trained until the morning, and when Uchijin came out to him again, she said that she was very tired, because in addition to the lessons, she had to help him in training. Then Shen threw a wad of bills at her and said that this was her salary, and was she really that tired? Then the beauty became happy and immediately forgot about her exhaustion. It turned out that Uchijin has a talent for seeing mistakes in training, and the young man thought that she could help him well. Of course, it was a pity for the girl, because she could only help someone with training, and she herself was far from ideal in this. A week later, the young man had finally reached the first level of the hawk technique, and this exercise was even stronger than hand-to-hand combat. Shen weighed all his options and realized that if he tried, he would reach the third level of cultivation. Then he took a blood purification pill and decided to test at the middle level if he could withstand such an amount of energy. After taking the pill, the young man told the system to raise his level to average. When everything happened, he realized that he was not exhausted at all, that the energy from the pill was still enough. And since there was still money left in the account, he decided to cultivate this technique to an advanced level. At the end, he felt a little tired and realized that the effect of the pill had worn off, and that its power was only enough to advance one level. Just at that moment, his girlfriend called him for lunch, and he happily answered that he was on his way, thinking to himself that the next step would be to pass the exam. The school was just holding a monthly exam in the form of sparring of students in the arena. Each student received a rating card, and the winner exchanged points with the loser. So the students with the lowest scores chose those with the highest score for sparring. The trainer entered the ring and announced to everyone that 2 students are missing today. So the rating of all the others automatically increases by 2 positions. The 2 young men discussed wanting to spar with Shen's former friend to gain experience, but he considered them too worthless. Chan, as a new student, was at the very bottom of the ranking list. He was not happy about it, but he was going to change it. And other students whispered to him behind his back, thinking that he had bribed someone again to get a higher rating in the future. 15 minutes of the exam passed. The points did not change much, but the young man with the first place could not understand why no one had yet challenged him to a duel to take away his points. 2 students were just discussing that it was better to be in third place than in first, because they did not really want to enter a duel with him. The guy was very proud of his temporary first place, and considered everyone who does not want to participate in sparring to be worthless. But at the same moment, he heard the voice of Shen Xian, who said that whoever did not notice him in the ring all this time was actually even more worthless. The audience was worried that the young man was going to fight this guy, because they knew he had a lower level of fighting skill. He looked at his opponent defiantly, saying that he thought that Shen Xian had escaped a long time ago. The instructor commanded before the battle, and then the boy got into a fighting stance, intending to show everything he was capable of. He pretended that he was about to use a completely different blow, and his opponent, with a satisfied expression on his face, was already about to dodge. But Shen tricked him, and he realized with despair in his eyes that he was coming. The young man used a bloody hawk blow and knocked out his former comrade. The judge recognized the boy's victory and promoted him to first place, and the defeated fighter found himself from the very bottom. The young men exchanged ranking cards. One of them left satisfied, and the other remained sitting on the floor. The students gossiped about how skillfully Shen was able to win, and how much progress he had made in such a short time in martial arts. One of the students said that the young man now had the first place in their class, but at the same moment, the other shouted in surprise, because something strange was happening in the ring. Shen Qian had lost to a student who was much weaker than him. The boys watching the sparring did not understand how this could happen, and one of the classmates decided to take away the first place from the weakling for his own benefit. And when he received the winning rating card, Shen Xian approached him and put his hand on his shoulder and wanted to talk. Then, that classmate returned the first place card to him because he didn't want to cross the boy's path. And Shen Xian immediately handed it to the one to whom he lost, and said that they were not rivals. The weaker classmate, with tears in his eyes, rejoiced at the feeling of victory, and the young man was glad that he was able to please him, but said that he would have to pay extra for this unforgettable feeling. Students began to get angry and call names, realizing that the boys did not even compete, but simply exchanged cards back. And the former friend continued to rise from the last place and was still in the 30th place. He wasn't happy about having to spar with the other students again, but he was so angry that he decided to just get back at them. He started picking on students and humiliating them to let off steam due to defeat. Meanwhile, Shen Qian tried to make full use of the opportunities of the first place and earn money. When Chizhu won 10th place, Shen approached him and challenged him to a duel again. And so every time, as soon as the young man managed to increase his rating, Qian took a card from him and lost it to others. This happened several times, and the young man made good money by providing such services. When the final ranking was finally shown, it turned out that Chizhu remained in last place. The poor thing even developed paranoia. He shouted for Shen Qian not to come near him again, to which Shen Qian replied that he would not play with him like that again. The young man earned a large amount of money this time by turning things over, and he was very happy about it. When the suspended instructor returned to work, he was very surprised by the results of this monthly exam. The students did not know what to say to him, and the student who won the first place just stood there satisfied. Then the teacher became very angry and realized that the reason was the student Shen Qian. The young man was just standing in a circle of classmates and holding money in his hands. And when the instructor saw this, he said that he had forbidden him to give bribes, so he now decided to take them. Then the boy replied that in this way he simply increased his popularity among his classmates, and thereby angered the teacher even more. But he warned that he would not count the results next time, although this time he decided to turn a blind eye to it. 2 days later, Shen Xian was approached by a classmate to whom he gave the first place and thanked him for it, and also gave his pill that he received for the victory. The young man thanked him for this, congratulated the boy on his achievement, and he himself thought that he had calculated and checked everything perfectly. The boy was sitting in class and thinking about where else to get the 300,000 yuan he lacked. But at that moment, an angry senior student, Chazhan, who was absent from the exam, approached him and asked why he broke the rules and spoiled the rating. The young man thought to himself that it was really the desire to make money that clouded his mind. But instead, he stood up and shouted to his classmate not to interfere in his affairs. Then the student said that if he did not admit his mistake, he would have to fight with him. And the boy was not happy with this turn of events. The young man perfectly understood that this student was stronger than him, and lowering the tone of his voice, he thought that it might be possible to come to an agreement without a fight. But the classmate was determined and said that he wanted Shen Qian to return all the money he had earned if he lost, and if he won, he would get the same amount. The guy was interested in such a statement because he really needed this money, and Chizhan promised that he would keep his word and punched himself in the chest as a sign of his promise. Then the classmates shook each other's hands as a sign of agreement on the pair. Lian was sitting under a tree reading a book when she heard the students discussing what was to happen in the arena today. She listened, and it turned out that the strongest student in the class and Shen were to enter the duel. Onlookers who chanted in support of one of the opponents had already gathered near the arena. The boys stood opposite each other, and the older student asked the opponent to teach him something new in battle. And the young man, in turn, asked if he would allow him to strike 3 blows first. When the opponent agreed and the fight began, Shen began his attack without waiting for the opponent to be ready. Other students saw how unfairly and dishonestly the young man acted towards his opponent. The senior student could barely withstand the bloody blow of the hawk, which was applied by a classmate. The young man was unpleasantly impressed by the fact that the enemy turned out to be much stronger than he expected. This time, Chizhan prepared himself and used his ability to deflect blows. Shen looked at him very carefully and thought about how to dispel his barrier so that the blows would reach the target. At that moment, Lian approached the ring and asked why the boys entered the fight. Then, Chizhan somehow lost his concentration and began to make excuses to the girl. He said that he wanted to get justice because of the last exam, and Shen could see from the boy that he liked his girlfriend. Then the young man decided to take advantage of this moment and shouted that he was going to strike, but the enemy only had time to return and ask questions. At that moment, the boy used the Bloodhawk strike again and hit Chizhan well. The senior students' fans were very disappointed, and Shen noted that he had won. Classmates again began to accuse the young man of doing something mean, but he replied that he warned before hitting. Lion realized with despair that she shouldn't have come to watch the match. In some abandoned room, 2 men were talking about the girl Wu Chijin, who was hiding in Shen's house. One of them told the boss that he learned a lot about the young man and that he turned out to be a former heir to a large company. The men talked about the fact that due to the status of this young man, it would be difficult for them to get him, so they decided to consult with the chief. They approached a man who was having dinner in a restaurant and told him what they had learned. The man, named Li, said he had to contact someone and tell them everything. In the past, terrible things happened in the underground markets of the city, such as violent debt collection. A man named Wu San-yi was the boss in this field, and his methods were very bloody, and his subordinates obeyed the master in everything. The bandit who received information about the young man and the girl called an unknown man and reported everything. But the man on the other end of the phone replied that there was no need to worry about the Shen family and allowed them to proceed. Then Li promised him to do everything properly, and his subordinate asked who this man was, who had such influence. When the mysterious figure hung up the phone, he thought that it was very good to have an intelligent subordinate, and then he thought about why it was Shen Qian who became so bold and suspected that he also had a system. At that moment, the senior student of the class was just transferring funds to a classmate who defeated him in the arena. Shen Qian asked him why he couldn't just give him cash, but the boy began to explain that he was raised by a father who has principles regarding earning money. But the young man got tired of listening to these sermons and simply asked if he had a limit on financial expenses, and he just nodded to that. Shen thought to himself that he would be happy to go to class with a classmate and talk to him, but he had money to deal with. Chizhan asked the boy if he took leave for half a day, but the young man replied that he would not return to school with him because he took the whole day off. And then he thought about what his coach would say about it. And the teacher was just conducting a class and writing something important on the board. He was very angry with Shen, who created a lot of problems and didn't even show up for the class. Lian sat at the desk and thought about the fact that she should remind her classmate that he should not skip classes, otherwise he will have problems. The girl came to the house of a classmate on a bicycle and, approaching the door, rang the bell. Uchijin thought it was the boy who had returned and happily went to the entrance to meet him. When both beauties met at the threshold, they were surprised and silently looked at each other. Uchijin thought that Lian was Shen's girlfriend, and she felt very uncomfortable with such a guess. And she, in turn, was very disappointed when she realized that her classmate was living with another girl. But at the same moment, the girls heard a voice nearby that called out the boy's name and were frightened. They were thugs who chased Uchijin, and they found her because of her carelessness, and Lian was also interested. Then the chief called Li and reported what was happening, and he ordered to detain the girls, but not to harm them. Then he spread his hands and was about to attack the beauty, telling them to obey. But at the same moment, he received a strong and unexpected kick in the face from Lian. Then his suitors decided to take revenge for the fact that she killed their brother, and another bandit rushed to the girl. But the beauty also beat up this heathen who dared to attack her. When she was done with the assailant, she said she had a rule of striking first. But at that moment, the third bandit, who, judging by his words, knew martial arts, began to approach her, and the girl did not like him very much. He made a terrible face before attacking, his eyes sparkling red, and he warned that he would not hold back in his power. Shen was spending time in the game room at that moment when a classmate approached him again and started reading morals. The young man was tired of listening to the sermons of an older classmate, and at that moment he called him on his mobile home number. He picked up the phone expecting some instructions from his friend, but heard the voice of a man who said that he had the girls hostage. In the living room of Shen's house, bandits tied his girlfriends to a chair and threatened them with a knife. The chief talked to the young man on the phone and ordered to collect the amount of money owed to them by Yu Chijin, and immediately listened to instructions through headphones from his boss to lure the young man into a trap. The guy tried to turn the situation in his favor and pretended that the girl was just a servant, and he didn't know anything about her affairs. Then the young man began to be rude into the phone, calling them bad bandits who can't do anything right. While he tried to calm down, he heard threats from the intruder about the hostages, but he pretended that he was not interested in it and asked not to interrupt him from the game. He pressed the button and hung up the phone. Then, with anger on his face, he thought that he would have to turn this heathen into a hostage himself. Surprised, the intruder told the boss that the young man didn't care about girls, but he replied that with this call, they had achieved more than expected. Shen immediately hurried to leave after the call, but a classmate stopped him, asking what happened, and he said he had to think about it. But the phone rang in the young man's pocket again, and he was upset because he didn't even have time to come up with a plan of action. When the guy picked up the phone, he started to speak with the criminal again. But in response, he heard that there was another person being held hostage. The boy was surprised to learn that there was another girl in his house, and his classmate was standing next to him and trying to understand what was happening. Shen covered his friend's mouth with his hand so that he would not interfere and continued talking to the criminal. The chief heathen told the young man not to continue pretending, and the young man asked what he needed from him. He ordered to bring 3 million yuan and not to tell anyone about what happened, and then hung up. A classmate took Shen's hand away from his mouth and asked what was going on. Then Shen replied that his girlfriends had been kidnapped and were being held for ransom. Chizhan immediately began rehearsing that he should contact the police, but the boy said that this was the last option and asked his friend for help. Then he punched himself in the chest and said that maybe Shen was counting on him. An hour later, a young man in a pink cap came to the entrance of his mansion. The thugs immediately approached him and began to mock and threaten him, considering him a nobody who does not know martial arts. One of the criminals used his crown technique, but was unable to break through the young man's defenses. Instead, the heathen himself flew away from the boy at a long distance, and he continued his movement as if nothing had happened. When the comrade let the poor man down, he shouted, pointing his finger at the young man, that he was not Shen. Then the young man turned to them and took off his hat, revealing Chizhan under it. He was going to make the men pay for their crimes. The attackers who were inside the house were going to help their comrades at first, but remembered that they were ordered to guard the hostages. But at the same moment, a boy quietly approached them and without much effort beat up both scoundrels. When the young man untied the hostages, he saw Leon among them, saying that these idiots did not even recognize her. Uchijin immediately grabbed the boy's hand and said that they needed to run away quickly. And the classmate informed him that among these bandits there is one master with a high level of cultivation, but she did not have time to explain how he appeared himself. All three turned at his voice and looked frightened at the approaching heathen. He joyfully boasted, spreading his hands, that he knew in advance what the young man would do, and was just waiting. He also added that the chief had allowed him to kill him, so he was not going to restrain his strength, and asked what he wanted to say in the end. And the young man was not going to talk to him, but only showed him an ugly gesture and sent him away. Then the criminal laughed and said that the young man would regret it and was about to use his technique. But at the same moment, he received a blow from Chijan, which he did not expect. Shen himself immediately joined the battle and struck with a bloodhawk lunge. The intruder was defeated, and the young man finally added that he also had friends and was not going to come alone. The heathen lay on the floor, and Chijan stood over him, mocking his worthlessness. Shen put a hand on his comrade's shoulder and praised him for his work, glad that they had worked together at such a time. Then all four got together and left, while the intruder remained lying on the floor. Shen told Lian that he saved her for a reason, and asked her for a recovery pill as a reward. But the classmate, hearing this, thought to himself that in fact the young man was very worried about the girls, but did not show it. But at that moment, the boy noticed something behind him and shouted to his friends to be careful. And then he received a very strong and completely unexpected blow in the back from the enemy. Shen looked up and saw the criminal standing on his feet. He couldn't believe his eyes that this was possible, but he thought to himself that if it weren't for the protection given to him by his mentor, he would not have survived. And Leon, looking at the intruder, understood that everything was not so simple with him. Uchijin said that she had read about the techniques used by the criminal and that the wounds he inflicted only made him stronger as long as he lived. Shen thought in fear that he would not be able to defeat the criminal himself, and that the best option was to run away and remain a decoy for someone else so that the others could hide and call for help. The boy thought about the fact that it is very difficult to choose the one who will stay here, and at that moment he was called by name. Chijan got up from the floor, wiping his face, and told his friend to take the girls and run until he caught the scoundrel. But Shen asked him not to risk his life, but to just hold on until he brought someone to help, and his classmate believed him. The criminal has already started mocking the young man, saying that the student who cannot call himself a practitioner. But Chijan was determined and said that he will not lose to anyone who dares to insult the girls, and thus attracted Lian's attention. Then the enraged opponent rushed at him using his powerful blow. He pierced the young man's defense and caused him a serious injury. The stronger opponent was about to leave, saying that they could have continued if not for the wounding of the young man who was lying on the floor. But I did not expect that he would come to his senses and cling to him to detain the heathen. But he kicked the boy in the face and shouted for him to let him go. He hit Chijan many more times, who tried with all his might to prevent the criminal from going after his friends. And when the attacker was about to deliver the last and most terrible blow to the young man, someone shouted for him to stop. He turned around and couldn't believe his eyes when he saw someone approaching from behind. The crippled Chijan could only say Shen's name when he saw him, and he told him to rest because he had already called for help and the boy had fainted. The intruder spoke condescendingly to the young man and said that he did not expect him to return. He asked the boy where the reinforcements he was talking about were, and he punched himself in the chest and said that it was here. Then the criminal burst out laughing, calling the boy a jester, and he replied that he could show what this jester was capable of, and stood up. The opponent asked with interest what he meant, But Shen was already ready for battle, saying that he would take revenge for his friend in such a way that even his own mother would not recognize the criminal. The young man remembered when he was a little boy and how he had been groomed since he was a child to inherit the Shen Corporation. He spent little time with his father, but every time they saw each other, he repeated that before acting, one should always calculate everything carefully. Unfortunately, he did not take these words very seriously until one day he was expelled from the family. Once on the street, he met a girl who was collecting money for charity. After a while on TV, he saw that this company was actually scamming people and was glad he didn't donate money to it in his time. After the expulsion, the boy did not engage in martial arts, but directed all his physical strength to work that brings him money. Also, the young man remembered how he visited his brother, who took his place in the family, and thought that the ability to calculate gives many benefits. The young man has long understood that the main criminal, who cannot be defeated in any way, was hired to deal with Shen himself. And when he asked his friend to detain the intruder in order to get the girls out, the best solution would have been to call someone for help. But the young man did not do it. He decided to act differently and thought that sometimes it is better to take a risk than to run away and later regret it. Shen quickly ran out to the balcony, and the attacker thought that he wanted to escape again and decided to interrupt the young man. The boy thought about the fact that last time when the criminal got angry, his accuracy decreased, and after calculating everything, the boy was able to pass him, almost unscathed this time. He aimed to get inside the house and wait for the funds to be deposited into the account. Shen stepped on the railing of the balcony and jumped forward, realizing that this was his chance. But the intruder followed him. He broke the metal part of the fence and tried to hit the boy with it. But he jumped into the room with all his might and landed near the bookshelves. A criminal followed him into the room and said that the boy was cornered and had nowhere to run. But at that moment, the young man received a message on his mobile about the transfer of funds. The guy added that he deliberately chose the opposite direction because he knew that the intruder would want to stop him, and he had to get to this particular room. Shen immediately poured a pill into his mouth that gave him the opportunity to recover, and the intruder realized that it was the young man who was after it. At that moment, the system converted 1 million wen and credited it to the account, and immediately began the process of raising the boy's combat level to the highest. At first, the attacker thought that the boy could not withstand the effect of the pill, but then realized that he was undergoing a process of chi purification and decided that he was trying to cultivate his powers to the first level. But when he tried to strike the young man, he received a powerful rebuff, which he did not expect. His eyes were bloodshot, and he looked scared at Shen, who was grinning evilly at his abuser, knowing that he had become stronger. The opponents stood facing each other and were ready to start a fight, and the young man said that now they and this criminal could compete on equal terms. He was determined and prepared to deliver the Bloodhawk's death blow. The criminal also rushed into the fight shouting threats, and a duel began between them immediately. After the first attempt, Shen realized that although their forces were equal, the enemy had more experience. The criminal said with a satisfied look that his technique would only get stronger with each strike the young man took, but the young man was determined to change the course of events. He used his skill on the criminal many times and was very fast at it. But the pagan was still angry and rejoiced at every attack of the boy, which increased the strength of the enemy. He said that if the young man continued in the same way in the future, he would be able to kill him with one finger. The young man, at the same moment, very quickly jumped on the shelf and began to defiantly mock the enemy. He challenged him and called him rude names, the criminal saying that he was too bold in the face of death. The man swung and carelessly hit the wall with his elbow and was distracted at that moment, and the boy realized that this was his chance. Shen lunged and delivered a powerful elbow blow to the attacker's chest. He broke through the wall with his body and flew into another room, and immediately got up, but defiantly said that he only became stronger from such a gift. But in a moment, the pagan realized that something was happening to his body. He fell to his knees and felt his strength leave him. Then the boy said that the criminal's technique only worked with minor blows, and that it was enough to simply strike harder at the previous point of damage. The attacker remembered how at the very beginning the young man struck him with a blow to the chest, and could not believe that he had calculated everything so far up to this moment. Then the man called the young man an outstanding warrior and hopefully asked if he would continue to beat the wounded man. But the boy replied with a defiant smile that he really thought so of him. After these words, the boy immediately rushed into battle to finally stop the criminal. He gave him a large number of strong blows and neutralized the heathen. He was lying on the floor, completely exhausted, and the young man was watching him from a height. Shen then made an obscene gesture to the opponent and said that he kept his promise, and immediately started shaking his hands, because he was also in pain. This story with the hostages gradually ended. The perpetrators were detained by the police. The master of martial arts was put on special handcuffs that blocked his inner strength and was also arrested. Unfortunately, the young man, when he examined the lying opponent, did not find anything valuable for himself. In the policeman's office, Shen again began to tell how difficult it was for him in this situation and how dangerous it was. And the policeman, recognizing the young man, said that it was not the first time he had heard such words from him. The guy started giving advice to the policeman to check the main criminal against the database. At the same moment, his subordinate entered the office and said that the DNA test was ready, to which the young man replied that they are very fast in their work. The police officer said that Shen was right, and this criminal is a fugitive who changed his name and returned to this city. Then the young man, with a joyful look, asked if he could get a reward for helping to catch such a dangerous bandit. And the policeman replied that he would try to find out what the reward was, and that the boy could go home. And then he asked why he was still here. But he said that he did not need money. Then the officer asked what he wanted. The young man replied that someone more serious was behind this criminal, and that he wanted to take part in the investigation to catch him. Shijan was at that moment in the ward of the city hospital. He was lying in bed and looking out of the window. His system credited him with points for good deeds and informed him that if he continued in the future his power would increase. The young man replied that he was not doing it for the sake of points, but because he wanted to help. Then the system replied that it is precisely because the young man is a good person that she coexists with him. And at that moment, the boy's phone rang. He quickly picked up the phone, glad that it was Lion, and the girl asked if she could visit him with her friends. A few days later, criminal Lee was approached by subordinates who were frightened and asked for advice. The man said that the rich girl's father would turn a blind eye to it because they didn't harm his daughter. But next time, he should be careful. The subordinates rejoiced at these words, praising their boss. But one of his employees immediately reported that the bank had seized their accounts. Lee told him not to scare his subordinates, but he himself was very stressed by these words. And another man reported that the offshore accounts were also frozen. At the same moment, his people started to report about the problems they faced recently. And then the boss replied that he did not expect Lian to be so influential. Shen and his friend were talking in her father's office. The girl decided to act in anticipation, and the young man asked if she was able to drive the one hiding in the shadows into a dead end with her actions. The beauty nodded and asked if the young man was ready, and he replied that the police had been following that man for a long time and would soon be able to expose him. The boy also said that he wanted to deal with Lee on his own, but the services would be better off catching them all together at the right time. The criminal at that moment was gathering all his subordinates to unite to confront the police. The man told them to get drunk and eat their fill, and then they would be able to overcome all difficulties, and the subordinates chanted in support of their boss. But that same evening, the attackers could not find Lee and discussed where he could have gone. At the same moment, a group of special forces burst into the room, ordering everyone to stand. The officer asked the arrested where their leader was, but they did not know what to answer, because he deceived them and disappeared himself. The policeman was very angry and punched the wall with all his might. He realized that the senior had set up his subordinates to escape, and then he noticed that Shen was also missing. and the intruder just ran through the dark streets, mentioning Shen and his girlfriend with unkind words. He was angry and thought that one day he would take revenge for being in such a situation. But then he heard someone address him. The boy took off his hood and revealed his face, saying that he expected such an act from a criminal, and that a few days ago he got into trouble because of him. Then Lee raised his hands and recognized the boy's strength that allowed him to defeat his accomplices. He said that he did not expect the young man to be able to catch him, also added that there was no point in fighting, and surprised the boy. The man pointed to his backpack and said that there were 3 million yuan in it, and if Shen missed it, he would give it to him. The boy rubbed his face, saying that this was a very attractive offer, and the criminal was just ready to attack the boy unexpectedly. He quickly launched the key, which he had been holding in his hand all this time, at the young man, wishing him to die. But the boy was ready for this and dodged the lunge, surprising the opponent with his speed. Shen jumped up high and said that he didn't believe his words from the beginning and expected the same from the criminal. While Lee was trying to get the guy to talk, law enforcement officers led by an officer appeared and surrounded the scoundrel. He only wondered how they managed to get there so quickly. The young man jumped down and began to praise the intelligence of the senior officer who tracked him on GPS. Then the criminal realized that Shen from the very beginning was not going to fight with the criminal or take his bribe. The intruder was handcuffed, and when he was being escorted, he turned to the young man and said that he really thought he had won, and that someone else would soon be the winner. But the boy with a smile on his face told him that he was looking forward to it. After how many days at Shen's house, Uchijin's friend asked him how much he earned on this case of exposing criminals, but he replied that no one paid him this time. And then he said that he knows where the girl can earn money, which is why she stared at the boy in surprise. She asked if he meant that she helps him in everything, as well as cooks and cleans, but he replied that the girl does not understand her value, and told her that she should actually teach martial arts, much to her surprise. Then the girl asked if that's why he didn't pay her earlier, because he was going to open a martial arts school, and he answered that only business can bring her as much money as she needs. The girl tried to refuse, arguing that she was completely far from martial arts, but the guy offered her 30% of the income. Then the girl said that maybe it's not so difficult, and you won't know until you try. Shen replied that it sounds quite strange. The Lian Corporation sponsored the opening of a martial arts training center where Wu Chizhen began working. The center quickly recruited its students. When the classes began, no one even suspected that the girl was unfamiliar with martial arts. Everyone was very satisfied with the teacher. One working day, the young man asked Wu Chizhen to bring him a checkbook. The girl was dressed in the uniform of a maid, and she was very embarrassed by this appearance, and the guy promised to raise her salary. The young man opened the income journal, and after counting, he was satisfied with how much he and the girl were earning. And at that moment, Lian entered the office. A friend reported that the young man was going to be expelled from school, but he did not understand what was happening because he had taken an official leave. The boy said that he copes well with homework and has good physical training and does not understand why he can be expelled. Wu Chizhen supported the boy. Then the classmate said that the young man broke many rules, one of which was cheating on the exam. But Shen replied that it was a long time ago and that the teacher was not going to report it. But the girl said that they would not count the results of the exam, that most likely the young man would behave in the same way next time, to which he replied that he just wanted to help a weak student to take first place. The beauty did not believe his words and said that he undermined the reputation of their school. But the young man did not agree with her and said that the reputation is being undermined by the school canteen. Wu Chizhen brought Lian a drink of water, and the young man thought that they were both very angry with him and asked what third rule he had broken. But the girl shouted at him to give her a drink of water first, because she was very thirsty. When Lian got drunk, she calmed down and said that the last fault was that the young man dared to fight at school with other classmates. Shen grabbed his head and sadly said that those guys were going to attack and beat him first, and that he had recorded everything on a recorder and given it to the director. Then the friend replied that thanks to the help of the police, the school was very proud of him and turned a blind eye to all the troubles, but someone really wants to frame the boy. Then the young man calmed down and thought. Uchajin looked at him, and at that moment the young man guessed that his brother was to blame for everything. Lian confirmed his guess and said that his family had influence over the school, and all he had to do was give them some proof, and they wouldn't be able to refuse. The young man replied that his brother had made his move after all, although before he had just quietly hated him, and that, apparently, he was prompted to do so by the boy's last heroic deeds. A classmate suggested that Shen go to school with her to try to sort things out, and said that Chizhan was also defending the honor of a friend at the moment. He then asked Yu Chijin to stay and look after the center while he was away. After some time, the young man and his girlfriend were walking down the street, and he was happy that he was only expelled from school instead of being expelled. The girl apologized for not being able to help him, because she really wanted to repay him for saving her. But the young man said that he and Chizhan already helped a lot, and in fact, it is not important for him to go to school. The main thing is to get a report card for college admission. Then Lian agreed that he had already raised his level to full, and there was no need for him to learn martial arts at school. And Shen said that his goal is to enter the most prestigious martial arts university in the country. The center for raising the level of combat skills was closed. The association checked him and found that he had no right to exist. Lian tried to find out what the problem was and why the school was closed, and the teacher was very upset that the premises were sealed. The guy thought that it was his brother trying to ruin everything for him again. But the girlfriend found out that a certain Wu San-yi was behind all this. Shen heard this name for the first time, but a friend explained that Li was not the real organizer, but the head of the entire underground world was behind the kidnapping. She also added that this gangster has friendly relations with the president of the Martial Arts Association. Then the young man realized that this was revenge for the fact that he helped catch his henchman. Lion explained that without a license, the center will not be opened in any case, and the license can be obtained upon reaching the 3rd level of combat skills, and this will take the boy about a year. But Shen smiled at her words and said that he wouldn't need that much time. The young man explained to his girlfriends that Tian would do anything to kick him out of school, and on the other hand, this mobster left him without his main source of income. Then the guy said that he should enter the university, so that it doesn't happen there, and if he can't open his center, then he needs to do something more serious. With these words, he greatly embarrassed Lian's friend, and added that if he could not get the certificate, he might not pass the exam either. The young man was lying on the floor and talking to the system, asking to check his account balance. The system replied that he only had 30,000 left, and he realized that that amount would not be enough for him for anything. He first thought of asking his friends Lian and Chizhan for money, but realized that it still wouldn't be enough to reach the full 1st level of a hawk strike. Then the boy decided that he needs to train some more techniques, because he still has no opportunity to improve this one. His thoughts were interrupted by the voice of Wu Xin, who came home after buying all the books he asked for. She and her friend sat down on the floor in the middle of the living room and began looking for information about a new technique that Shen could use. But almost every book they opened was of no practical use to the young man. Then the boy, in despair, fell on the floor with his arms outstretched and thought that it was impossible to find the necessary information in the ordinary market. But at that moment, the girl read the title of some pamphlet that interested them both. The writing was indeed better than the previous ones, but still the boy was disappointed because it was not about martial arts, but about transformation. Uchijin said that this was an unusual transformation, but the young man replied that it did not change anything for him. After a quarter of an hour, the guy was completely tired, and the girl continued to read about the technique that allows you to copy the appearance of others. But it is very difficult to reach a high level in it. She also disappointedly added that this exercise was not designed to purify qi energy, and Shen was already interested in the information about copying the appearance. Then he took the pamphlet from the girl's hands and ordered her to throw all the other books into the pantry. Peruga incredulously asked if he was really going to practice. He then replied that he now had plenty of time to practice because of his suspension, and he had also come up with a new way to find money. The guy decided to go to a financial company and ask for a loan, but the employee unfortunately refused him due to his credit history. The young man got angry and began to demand an explanation why they cannot provide loans, because they do not refuse other people. And the creditor replied that the company does not lend money to everyone. Then the young man jumped up from his seat and shouted that it was he who helped catch the bandit Lee, who was their financial director. The guy demanded that the woman call the management and verify his words, which she did. The woman, with a serious look on her face, listened to everything that was said to her, and then hung up the phone, bowed to the young man, and asked if he was the same Shen from the rich family. The guy answered her, and thought to himself that he wanted to practice the appearance change technique to steal Cao Tian's identity, and then asked the woman why she stopped mocking him after the call. She apologized and invited him into the principal's office. He entered and sat down in a chair as if at home, and began to demand money. The creditor replied that due to the fact that the young man belongs to a rich family, they can give him a loan of up to 5 million. The boy then asked if they were afraid that he would not return, but the man replied that such a thing could not happen to the Shen family. The boy was informed about the interest rate and given a deadline of 3 months, and then given to sign the documents. Then the young man extended his hand to the director and thanked him, and he shook it in return, saying that it was not worth the thanks. The man's hand turned out to be quite strong, and the banker noticed that the guy was in no hurry to leave and asked if he needed anything else. Da Shen replied that he noticed that the man was also a practitioner and wanted to know how strong he was. When the boy came out, the principal decided that he wanted to buy a license to open his school and spoke disparagingly of him. He also added that if the boy does not give this money, he will be ready to kill him. Shen stood in front of the company building and triumphantly thought that he was right that they would give him a loan. Then he clenched his fist and decided to play with this director next time, because he felt in him the same level as he had. The young man came to the restaurant after spending 3 days recovering from cultivation at home, and he was very hungry. But the workers were scared. They said that it was necessary to close and even took the advertising board from the street. The young man and his girlfriend stood and watched as the door closed in front of them. The boy could not understand why they scared the restaurateurs so much. That girl said that last time he ate everything at their place, and of course they are afraid to let him in now. After the boy received the credit, he upgraded the hawk strike to full level and also received 2 recovery pills at the monthly exam. He remembered that the pills he bought on the black market weren't as good as the ones given at school, and he wasn't sure if they were strong enough to level up. But he still decided to give it a try, and in the same instant, 3 million was withdrawn from his account, raising his level and starting the chi purification process. The young man was happy that he had reached the first level of a martial art, and now he will soon be able to reach the second. But the pills from the market were not enough to compensate for the energy costs, and the boy for some reason reached for the toilet. Fortunately, a friend of Yu Chijin came and did not allow him to eat from the toilet by cutting it with a frying pan. Then the guy thought that after eating everything at home, the girl brought him to this restaurant, so he decided that they shouldn't come here anymore. The friend reminded the boy that she paid for him, and now he owed her money. Then they went to a Chinese restaurant, and the boy decided to treat Yu Chijin at his own expense. The girl looked at the table and said that there was no need to order so much, because they might not eat, and that he could have just paid the debt, but he said that she needed to earn it. The friend wrinkled her nose and leaned on the table looking at the boy, and he asked her why she was not eating. She then replied that she wanted to know what he needed from her, and he replied that she shouldn't worry. He just wanted her to teach him the divine transformation technique. He thought to himself, while pouring a drink for the girl, that he had been trying to master this science for several days. But he couldn't, and she replied that as long as he didn't ask her for money, she was ready to help him. The girl was very hungry and started eating, telling her friend that it would be easy to reach the initial level. But if you don't practice further, it's easier to turn to a surgeon to change your appearance. Then she added that copying the appearance was just a theory and that the author himself had not managed to do it, and the guy replied that he had some options and he just needed help with the foundation. Uchijin asked why he needed this technique or if he was going to open a plastic surgery clinic, and the young man replied that he had a better idea. A few days later, the system informed the young man that it had discovered a new technique for improvement, and he breathed a sigh of relief because he was afraid that this science would not be recognized by the system. The boy also asked if he would need chi purification pills and was told that this technique was not related to her. He was satisfied with the answer and asked how much money was needed to level up, and learned that almost 1.5 million was needed for full mastery. Shannon was not happy with what he heard because the price turned out to be high enough for him. But then, after thinking a little, he decided that he must fully master this technique in order to implement his plan. So the young man ordered the system to increase the transformation to full level, and after withdrawing the funds from the account, everything began. After finishing, the young man felt unwell and wanted to take a break. But after looking in the mirror, he realized that the money was spent for good reason. Shen examined himself, learning how the technique worked, and then decided to find a girlfriend to try and see if he could change his face. The young man spent 2 days investigating everything about the director of the financial company and decided to force him to hand over all the documentation. He stood on the road and waited for a car that was driving nearby, thinking that then he would be able to forget about his debt. The financier, seeing an obstacle in front of him, barely had time to press the brakes so as not to crash. The car spun and drove, and then it stopped a few meters from Shen. The man ran out of the car in anger and started shouting at the boy. Why did he go out on the road? The young man stood motionless, having previously covered his face with a black bandage. Then the banker rushed to him with claims that he was afraid to show himself to him, even though he dared to block the way. He approached the boy and began threatening to tear off his hands and then kill him. But Shen at the same moment used a kick against the opponent, who did not expect it. The man tried with all his might to repel the attack, and it was very difficult for him. Then he realized that the young man was also a martial artist and jumped back, asking if he needed money. Shen took off his mask, and the banker was scared because he recognized him as Yu San-yi. But the young man could not understand why exactly this name, because he adopted the appearance of Cao Tian. Shen then realized that the underground thug was his hated brother, though he couldn't believe it. The financier rushed to the boy, saying that he did not recognize him and did not understand why he attacked him so suddenly. But the young man only smiled at his question and thought to himself that he must somehow get information while trying not to say anything superfluous. Then the man thought that it was about the business they were running and asked if it was possible to talk about it on the phone. And the young man replied that he guessed and thought about how lucky he was that the man spoke up himself. Shen thought about the fact that he did not know anything about these matters and was going to talk as little as possible so that the man would tell him everything himself. The banker mentioned the control of finances in another city. The boy nodded, and he wondered if the authorities of Cao Tian had gone so far. He continued to talk about the affairs and assured that the boss, whom the young man pretended to be, could trust him, to which the young man nodded, amazed at what his brother had achieved in 2 years. The guy sat and thought about what happened to his relative, that he had changed so much. Then the young man asked the man about the errand he had just talked about. The director told about the financial company he is currently involved in and that he carries all important documents with him. Shen asked if he had all the documents, to which the man replied that he constantly renews them in his briefcase for easy reference. And the man was already going to hand over the briefcase to the boy to appease his boss, who did not trust him very much and whom he was very afraid of. The young man was glad that he did not even have to ask for these documents, and the financier happily handed them directly to him. Then Shen told him to stop working in another city because he had a more important assignment. The guy said that there were all kinds of rumors and that maybe his phone was being tapped. Then the subordinate concluded that this is exactly why his boss behaves so strangely. The young man continued to make up a conspiracy story and ordered him to get a job as a construction worker, not to use his phone and wait for further instructions. The man gladly agreed to this, saying that he would do everything properly, and the boy mockingly replied that he would calmly entrust this operation to him. After some time, Shen watched the plane in which the financier flew, and before that, he made sure that he destroyed his phone. Then the guy assumed the appearance of the director of a financial company and, smiling, thought of something. The next morning, the guy in the form of the head of the company arrived at the workplace. He greeted the surprised employees and headed to the director's office. When he closed the door, subordinates began to whisper that the boss was not like himself and usually came in without a mood. The young man closed the door from the inside, making sure that no one suspected the change of leadership. Then he called and ordered no one to disturb him, regardless of what they hear in the office, because he will be working on important documents. After that, he rubbed his hands together and went to the safe, which he noticed last time in the office. Remembering the password, the boy opened it and spilled everything that was there on the floor, rejoicing at the profit. Shen tried to convert all the treasures into the system, but she could not do it, because the money was someone else's. Only a few tens of thousands were counted. Employees heard a rumble from the director's office. One even wanted to check what was happening, and a colleague stopped him. He warned the boy about the consequences of disobeying the leadership. Meanwhile, Shen finished destroying all the important information of the company and also obtained compromising information on them. He saved all valuable data on a flash drive and then decided to do something else to get rid of these bandits forever. In the living room of the luxurious palace, a video Shen had recently recorded was playing on a laptop. In it, he appeared in the form of a director who confesses to all the company's crimes and reveals compromising information about it. Cao Tian was watching this recording with his loyal servant standing next to him. The video was about a mobster, which was actually the heir of the Shen family, and at that moment, his real name was revealed, and it greatly embarrassed the bandit who was hiding behind a pseudonym. The employee immediately began to assure them that they had no evidence and that he had already asked influential people to deal with all this. Then Cao Tian asked what had happened to the company, and at that moment his phone rang and he learned that there was a classified document on them on the internet. The evidence turned out to be very serious and the company was closed. Then the man asked where the director himself is now. The worker replied that no one had seen him for 3 days, and Cao Tian hung up the phone angrily. He left the room and finally gave the order to find and kill the financier within 3 months. And at this time, somewhere in a distant city, the former general director was thinking about his fate while working in construction. The man thought with satisfaction that he would definitely serve his master and he would recognize him for such a sacrifice. Meanwhile, Shen continued to practice his physical skills at home. The young man was happy that he had finished with the illegal financial company and now no one would chrome his debt. In a moment, he broke through the rock with a snap of his fingers. The boy was happy to look at his hand and thought that it was enough to concentrate, and everything worked out for him. The system reported that the transition to the second level of the hawk was allowed, and the young man happily asked how much it would cost him. When the young man found out the price, he thought that it was too expensive for him. But he remembered that he had found jewels in the director's safe, which could be exchanged for an even bigger pile of money. Then the young man took out the pills he also found in the safe and popped a few into his mouth, commanding the system to raise the hawk strike to full level 2. A sufficient amount of money was withdrawn from the account, and the process began accompanied by all kinds of sounds. When everything was finished, Shen thought that he was left poor again. But after feeling the great power in his hands and breaking through a huge stone with one blow, he decided that it was worth it. A fire ignited in the city of hitting the stone, and the boy, looking at his fist, thought that such power was not equal to the second level, but rather to the third. Then the young man joyfully thought that the license needed to open a martial arts school would soon be in his hands. The martial arts master's certificate actually gives great privileges and is issued by the government itself. Yu Chijin asked the boy where he could get this certificate, and he replied that every month there is a tournament in the City Association of Masters. There is special equipment that checks candidates during registration for the exam. The girlfriend waited outside while the young man was checked to see if he was worthy of the third level. When the young man went out the door, the girl asked about the results, and he replied that he was admitted. The friends were walking and discussing how the exam would go, and at that moment, a man passed them by who paid attention to Shen. The guy noticed the stranger and remembered that Yu San-yi, that is, Tian, controls all processes in the city. That same evening, the heir Shen and his friend were sitting in some tavern. The man was just telling the rich man that he should have transferred the financial company into his hands, and these troubles would not have happened. But in a moment his phone rang, and Comrade Tian picked up the phone and answered the call. At the other end, it was reported that Shen Tian was going to receive a certificate, and the man could not believe it. He was very surprised. The new heir sensed from the man's appearance that something had happened and asked worriedly. Then the bandit angrily told all the details about Sheena's registration in the E1 certificate exam. Tian was stunned by what he heard and said dejectedly that this could not happen. The men began to discuss how the young man was able to reach the third level so quickly if he had no talent in martial arts before. Then Tian's accomplice promised that he would prevent the boy from getting this certificate and lit his cigarette. Blowing smoke, the man explained to the boy what he was going to do to prevent his brother's plan, and the boy apologized for causing him too many problems. And then he added that the man should be careful, because the young man became too strong and made his interlocutor laugh with these words. Then the man, throwing his cigarette on the floor, said that he would send his best examiner, who had defeated much stronger fighters, to the tournament. Morning came in the Shen house. Everyone woke up. Uchijin was awakened by some commotion, which she asked about with a stretch. The young man replied that he had a license exam today, and asked why the girl woke up so late, putting breakfast on the table for both of them, and she replied that she had studied and went to bed late. Then the girl added that the exam should take place on the 15th, and today is only the 14th, and by the look of the young man, she understood that he was up to something. The match began in the arena, and already the third participant was eliminated without passing the exam. In the judge's place was a ruthless man whom Comrade Tian promised to send, and people did not understand why he did not even give the participants a chance to receive a certificate. The director of the association, who was in cahoots with the Shen heir, with their deputies, also attended the exam. Chance and his girlfriend came to the fight, and in the arena already the 13th participant was eliminated without receiving a certificate. The commission asked the examiner why only one person passed the exam, but he replied that all the others were not worthy opponents, which angered the director. The judge turned around and left with no intention of making concessions, and Tian's friend, who had set up the examiner for Shen's failure, was already regretting his decision. At that moment, a young man who could not find this arena came to the door of the hall and made the director worry. The door began to open, and he was already happy that finally the guy he needed appeared. But a completely different participant entered the hall, and the director almost exploded with rage. Many hours passed, and at the end, the boss asked the judge if Shen had come. But he said no, and the exam had long since ended. Then the man thought that the young man did not need a certificate, but he heard a conversation between two men who discussed that it was necessary to go to another city where the exam could be easier. The director clutched his head in despair and thought that the young man could really have obtained the certificate somewhere else and ordered the employee to check all the registers. Then the boy replied that he found this name among the participants of another city, and by this he was very disappointed and angered the boss. In the meantime, Shen and her friend were walking around the city. She was interested in how the exam went, and he replied that everything was fine, and he would receive a certificate in a month. Then Yu Chijin said that she did not expect that the young man would leave a day early to take the exam in another city, and he replied that he could not trust the association at home because it could have been bribed by his brother. Already late at night, Chan received a call, and was informed that his brother passed the exam in another city. The heir said that the father had already learned about Shen's exploits and wanted to return him to the family, so now a new battle between them would begin. The man was standing on the balcony, holding the phone and looking at the sky, then took a mirror from the table. At the same moment, a projection appeared from him, which launched the heavenly system of exchange. In some abandoned industrial building, someone was training his fighting skills. It was Cao Tian, and when he finished, he thought that the robot he was using for training was very good, and that at one time he was not fooled with this. He remembered how 2 years ago he was a nobody and everyone made fun of him, while Shen Qian was the heir to a rich man with no special skills. But everything changed after Tian raised the level of martial arts. Or rather, the system did it for him. Every month, the system activates itself to exchange resources. She is not interested in values, but rather rare things that are on Earth. During these 2 years, he received a lot of benefits from the system, but there were also deals that brought him nothing but losses. All the things he exchanged have different meanings and are endowed with different magical effects. The best achievement was a transformation master who changed his appearance and received energy from a huge key. Then Tian thought how good it was that upon first activation, it would bind to one host and stay with it until someone else launched it. Corporation owner Shen was sitting in his office when there was a knock on the door, and he let him in. Tian entered and bowed to his father, asking why he called him, and the man replied that he wanted to bring Shen home, and if he had anything to say about it. The boy replied that he could not contradict his father's words. Then the man nodded and asked about the incident that happened to him, as well as about the fact that the financial company with which they were doing business was arrested. The man then decided that it was Tian who had set up his accomplices to take over the company, and slapped him in the face, declaring that the Shen family belonged to him as long as he was alive. The father also added that he had no right to act without his knowledge, and the boy replied that this would not happen again. Then the man chased Tian away, saying that he was just a convenient tool for him. After some time, a representative of his father visited Shen and congratulated him on receiving the certificate, but he replied that he was still not worthy of the Shen family. The servant tried to convince the boy to return by justifying his master's act, but the young man understood that his father was not doing it for him. Then the boy asked if he came back what would happen to his brother, and the man replied that they would compete for their place under the sun, and asked if the boy agreed. He also added that the father turns 50 next week, and he must personally announce that his son is returning to the family. Then the boy replied that he would definitely come, and the man was happy to hear and said goodbye to him. Uchijin was just wiping the table with a cloth, telling a friend that his father was very selfish. The young man answered that it was so, and when he didn't need him, he kicked his son out of the house, and then he remembered how his father always taught him to calculate everything. And he thought about whether feelings for him remained in his father's heart, or whether only the status of family existed for him. Then he remembered how he had been kicked out of the house by order of the old man, and that his father's love for him was too weak. Uchijin was just peeling an apple and asked whether he would return to his family or not, and the young man grabbed the fruit from her and asked why he should not return. He also replied that if he did not return, someone else would use the family's status and money, and he thought angrily to himself that his father wanted him and his brother to compete for it. In the palace of the Shen family, there were many guests who came to the party on the occasion of the owner's 50th birthday. A man was drinking wine from a bottle and then exhaled and said it was too bland, and next time he should try white. Everyone congratulated this man on his promotion to director, and behind him stood those who ridiculed him. The man was drunk and was trying to take off his tie, and his friend was thinking about the fact that he is not who he claims to be. At that moment, a figure appeared behind them, and the men were just discussing the need to get rid of the two old workers. Shen was just behind them and couldn't believe that Cao Tian had just gotten rid of these loyal servants. Everyone continued to congratulate the man named Gan and praise his talents. But someone dared to call him names, and he became very angry and turned his head to see Shen behind him. Then he lowered his head and said that if he wanted to call him that, then he did not dare to contradict him, and the boy said that he underestimated him, if in 2 years he had grown up to the director. The young man said that he had always looked down on him, but he had indeed reached a new status, and the man was uncomfortable with such words. Then Shen turned and waved goodbye and walked away, while the disgruntled man remained standing. The crowd began to gossip, however, how this young man dared to come to the party after being kicked out. But some heard the latest news and explained that he had received a certificate. The offended man thought to himself that the boy would only have to dream of taking Cao Tian's place. At that moment, the elder Shen spoke into the microphone and thanked everyone for coming to his party, which would attract his son's attention. The old man stood surrounded by Cao Tian and another man and wished everyone a good time. The young man noticed that during these 2 years, his father began to look even worse than before. And at that moment, the man coughed. But he quickly recovered and continued to speak, informing that his eldest son, whom he allegedly sent away from home for training, received a certificate and returned. Shin stood surrounded by onlookers and caught the interested glances of those who were stunned by the news. The old man called his son to come to him and gave him his hand, to which the young man smiled, thinking to himself that he was only playing the role of a good father. When the boy approached, he took his hand and raised it up while making a speech. Lian was also present and saw it all with her own eyes, thinking that two personalities like Shen Xian and Cao Tian could not get along. The father continued his speech and announced that the heir would be the one who first reached the bloodline. Cao was displeased with this turn of events, and Shen was generally stunned by what he heard. People began to discuss who to root for in this confrontation, and everyone had their own beliefs about it. The audience continued to argue about the winner, and the young man stood and looked at the trail of his father, who was led by two men. Shin realized that his father had gone to his place to rest due to his health condition, and thought that it was better for him not to go out at all, and given his character, he would once again pretend that he was fine. The boy began to look around and look for his Uncle Vu, and when he walked through the banquet hall, he felt that everyone was ignoring him. The young man was just about to put a cherry in his mouth and taste it when Cao Tian called him. He wanted to talk to the young man about how he managed to turn into a talented practitioner so quickly. The boy tensed from these questions, while his brother took him to a room where no one was. Shen did not understand what the relative wanted to hear from him, but he insisted and questioned everything. He began to wonder if the boy sometimes found something valuable, but the young man waved his hands and pretended to be a fool. At that moment, a voice was heard outside the window. Someone began to shout accusations toward Shen, and Tian took the opportunity until the boy was distracted to strike. But the young man stopped his hand, getting angry and demanding an explanation from his brother for the act. But the door of the room opened, and the newly appointed director, with a bunch of men, entered the room and accused the boy of murdering his father. He was very surprised by what he heard. Both boys were stunned by the news. Shen couldn't believe that this had happened to his father. One of the men began to accuse the young man of what he did because of the grudge he held against his father. The worker added that he himself saw how the boy committed this terrible crime in front of everyone, and lamented the fact that the man worked very hard all the time, avoided a large number of attempts, and eventually died at the hands of his son. But Shen did not pay attention to the accusations. He could not believe that his father was dead, and looked at everyone in shock. Then, Tian took advantage of the fact that his brother was distracted and struck him, angry with him for what he had done. He shouted that the boy harbored a grudge because his father kicked him out of the house, but he had to forgive the old man. Other people who were present whispered about what they heard, and also began to support the accusations against the young man. Shen just came to his senses, covered in blood after being beaten by his brother, and couldn't figure out why everyone was blaming him, because he had been here all along. But the new heir continued to throw reproaches at the boy, and his loyal servants supported him. The young man got up and decided that he should not stay there any longer, and Tyann continued to shout that the boy should not be allowed to escape, even though he had deliberately brought him into this room so that he could escape. The young man immediately jumped out of the window, and the satisfied brother pretended to be disappointed. But in fact, he did so specifically so that Shen would never be able to wash away these accusations. The men ran up to the window from which the boy had recently jumped and saw him fall into the pool. After that, Tian began to issue orders to his six to catch the fugitive and report to the Martial Arts Association. Then the man asked what the heir himself would do, but he answered that he would go with his father. 15 minutes later, Tian returned and started talking about money and power, pretending to the workers that he was very upset about his father's death. Then he added that although his father had not decided on an heir, he should take his place and hoped that everyone would support him. At the same moment, the indignant senior Shen entered the room and said that he was still alive and that he should not dare to give any orders in his place. Tian, who did not expect such a turn, was very confused, and his father replied that he expected an assassination attempt and deliberately pretended to be dead to mislead the attackers. His other employees were very happy about this, and his son also pretended to be happy, but did not understand how his father could guess about the attempt. Then Tian again began to slander his brother and accuse him as if he had done it, but his father looked at him with a menacing look. Then the boy was very frightened, thinking that the old man had guessed that he had actually hired the killers, but the man replied that it couldn't be Shen, because it was he who had warned him about the attack, and also added that the boy could not be in two places at the same time. But Tian insisted that everyone saw how he did it. But the father put his hand forward and interrupted his son's story, saying that he had already found out that it was someone else, and then added that the criminal was among them, and scared the boy with these words. He stood in the circle of his henchmen with his head down, and looked from under his forehead, and the man said that he was giving the last chance to the culprit to confess what he had done. Then the elder asked where the body of the one who died in his place was, and the new director answered that they had taken it to the guilty grave. The man turned to leave the room, but added that he was giving himself time to think things over and confess, and he hoped no one would run away or they would regret it. In the wine cellar, Shen stood over his father's body. He thought that after his father's act, he would not feel sorry for him, but his heart was very heavy. The boy opened his father's face and was very sad, because he had no one else besides him. Then he thought that his brother had behaved strangely today, and that perhaps these events were connected. The young man covered his father's eyes with his palm and pulled up the sheet. He thought that there was no evidence, but he didn't need it. Then the boy again took the form of his father, and his eyes burned with anger and hatred. Shen thought that Cao Tian must die after all he had done. The commotion was still going on in the palace, and the men present were looking at each other and whispering among themselves. Old Shen, or rather Shen Qian in his form, returned to the room, and the younger son began to slander his brother again. His suitors began to play along with him and convince him that they had seen the boy with their own eyes. But the head looked sternly at everyone and ordered them to shut up, saying that he had no doubt that they would want to shift the blame to someone else. And the employees were frightened when they remembered how cruel the head of the corporation was, actually all this time. Then the father turned to Tian and asked where he was all this time, to which the boy could not give a normal answer and stuttered. The elder got angry and hit his son on the head with a bottle, so hard that it broke, and then he said, wiping his hands with a napkin, that he gave him a chance, and he didn't take it. He asked the men responsible for the safety of the family members where they were, and they said that Tian had ordered them to do other things. Other employees, as it turned out, were also dismissed from their workplace. They received such an order from the new director and his deputy, who were Tian's minions. Then, the head of the Shen family asked Gan if he and his friend were the only ones who saw what really happened and praised them for their loyalty. And the director, with a smile on his face, said that it is their job to monitor everything that is happening. But the old man added that they were loyal to the wrong master and that it was no wonder that they got such positions thanks to Tian. Then the man said that he was too kind to his son, and with these words both surprised and frightened the boy. He again began to slander his brother and tried to justify himself by convincing his father that it was Shen's trap. And he thought to himself that he hoped that after the death of the old man, no one would delve into the details of what happened. Chief Shen finally did not hold back and shouted that Tian wanted too much to take the place of the heir and was ready to kill his father and brother for this. Those present were stunned by these words and finally understood who was behind everything. Then Tian realized that the whole situation turned against him, although he still tried to justify himself somehow. At that moment, the boy was grabbed by a huge fist of fire, which was called a dead grip. It was Vu. He had outstanding combat capabilities and ordered Tian to explain the details of the event. But he sat in a corner on the floor and convinced his father that there was no evidence against him. Then the man replied that his words were enough to make the boy pay for what he had done and ordered the worker to break the boy's legs and then interrogate him. Tian then realized that he couldn't stand up to Master Vu, who practiced bloodline, and decided to use teleportation to disappear. Everyone present saw a bright, blinding light and began to hide from it, not understanding where it came from. Vu realized that he was trying to escape and was already preparing to use his power to prevent it. But the grip didn't work. He didn't catch the rascal. And when the flash faded, everyone saw that Tian was gone. The master removed his hand and could not believe his eyes that he had not caught the heathen. And the elder asked where he had gone. The man reported that the boy managed to escape, and the head asked how such a master as Vu could let him in. Then the man said that he used the skill of searching for blood, but he could not feel the boy within a kilometer radius, and the elder did not understand how he was able to cover such a long distance so quickly. He then ordered the staff to calm down the guests and then let them go and apologized for the commotion. Elder Shen went to the exit, calling the master after him, who followed him obediently. When they went out into the courtyard, the chairman began to think about what crime Tian was going to commit for the sake of the title. Then he said to warn the police about everything and get a warrant for the boy's arrest, and also ordered to take care of his son's accomplices. As for the body that was lying in the wine cellar, he asked it to be frozen in order to be buried later. Later, in Shen's house, in the figure of his father, he climbed the stairs, wondering what skills his brother used to escape. And he decided that since his brother was not there, he would take advantage of his absence and sneak into the room to look for evidence against him. The boy entered the relative's bedroom and returned his appearance again in order to search the premises. His attention was drawn to the table. He saw a drawer with a combination lock and forced it open to find a black notebook there. Shen took out that notebook and realized that it was exactly the thing he was looking for. He unfolded it and began to read. There were records of the brothers' amazing purchases, such as a rare crystal robot that could change shape. The young man thought that this was the robot that could kill his father, and also wondered where Tian could buy all these strange things. He then received information about the exchange divine system, and that he had to buy land on the outskirts for better moonlight communications. The guy was surprised to realize that Tian also had a system and decided to find out about everything from his. He received an answer that other systems also exist in other worlds, and that there are many of them, and she could not give more information. The boy scratched his beard with his hand, and finally began to understand what was happening around him. Then he wondered why, 19 years ago when he was born, a system that appeared from another world chose him. The guy kept asking about the functions of other systems, and whether his system was unique, to which he received a positive answer, but his system had no information about the others. Hearing about the uniqueness, the guy was happy, thinking that he had done a good job. Then the young man raised his hand and told his system that it could not exist without him, and that he was its father. And then I asked about the tie-in exchange option, but again there was no information about it. He frowned angrily, thinking to himself that it would be too easy to get everything from the system. The boy realized that he would not be able to get information about his brother's system, but he could find a plot on the outskirts, and he turned into a father again. He left the room, taking the notebook with him, and asked Vu to call his son's driver. Unfortunately, the man only had a regular schedule and did not know where else the heir could go. Then the old man bowed his head and asked him to think carefully, and the driver still remembered how Tian forgot to delete the history from the navigator, and it turned out that he drove to an abandoned location. Late at night, Chairman Shen and his workers reached the abandoned buildings outside the city. Vu reported that the plot really belonged to the heir, and the man noted that the moon was very full that night and called everyone to come inside. When they left, the master said that he could not sense anyone nearby by using the blood sensing skill. But their attention was drawn to the door, which was protected by something and could not be penetrated even by Vu's blow. He remarked that it would be easier for them to destroy the whole building than to open this door. Then Chairman Shen decided that if the master could not do anything, then it must be an object from another world, and asked everyone to leave him and go home. The workers protested, but the man insisted that they leave him, because he wanted to get rid of the extra eyes. He asked to leave the car for him, and ordered to deal with Tian's underground activities and his connections. The men got into the car and drove off, and Vu thought that his old master wanted to be alone so that no one would see his weakness and figure himself out. When they left, the boy again changed the appearance from his father's body to his own. The young man approached the protected door and touched it, realizing that he would not be able to open it. He tried in every way to open the room. He almost danced next to her, but he did not succeed. He stood and thought that everything was more difficult than he expected. But then something occurred to him. Shen decided to try to take the form of his brother, leaned towards the scanner, and it beeped. The person was identified, and the door to the building began to slowly open. The guy entered and saw a lot of all kinds of treasures that he was going to appropriate. He found a large number of small arms and melee weapons and wondered why he needed them in peacetime. There were a large number of strange things that Tian had acquired over the past few years that the young man had only seen in books, and a small bottle with some kind of elixir, and a red cloak and a staff, which the boy took and began to glue the fool. But in a moment he heard some noise and remembered that he had not closed the door. The boy turned his head and saw someone's silhouette at the entrance. It was a liquid crystal robot that had just turned back and had the appearance of Shen himself. The artificial intelligence asked why the owner returned an hour earlier than planned, and then the boy remembered that he was in Tian's body. The robot said it had a low charge and asked for permission to recharge, which the young man happily allowed. Then he connected to the charging station in the form of a key, and the young man could not believe how much he looked like him. He walked around and thought that it was not very easy to use because it also had to be charged, and at that moment the robot asked what his master's order would be. The young man thought about ordering him, but then decided to ask about his last order, as if he had forgotten. 15 minutes later, the robot returned to its form, and Shen thought it was a good thing that the charging key was large, and Tian couldn't carry it around. The boy held the artificial intelligence in his palm, and thought that this thing was not quite perfect, because it could not understand that he was its master. And then he remembered that Tian would return soon. At first he wanted to call back the workers to help deal with his brother, but he was afraid that they would witness many secrets. Then he decided to try to cope himself. The more he wanted to avenge his father, although he did not have a warm relationship with him. As expected, Tian himself arrived at the abandoned factory half an hour later. He lowered himself to the ground and looked towards the pavilion where he kept his valuables. And then he took out the amulet of teleportation and thought that, unfortunately, he cannot set exact coordinates, so he has to return for a very long time. He approached the building and scanned his face while opening the door of the premises. Tian walked inside and saw that the robot had already returned and connected to the charging station. Then he was happy that he could use his resources to regain his power. He then ordered the transformation master to return to his base form, but immediately remembered that he had not let him in and wondered how he managed to get inside. At that moment, the robot seemed to go mad and attacked the master, inflicting serious blows on him. The man got very angry, not understanding what was happening, and started shouting. But the artificial intelligence had already captured the target and was going to use the weapon. Tian was frightened and tried to cover himself with his hands, but the pursuit missiles were already flying at him at a crazy speed. The air was struck by a large number of blows and flew a long distance. The robot approached him again, and this time attacked with his own hand without using a weapon. He struck at him again, but due to Tian's defense, he missed his target, although he did break one protective object. The man got angry and rushed to the robot, shouting something about the broken thing as he went. After some time, the AI fell to the floor completely unfit for combat due to its low charge. Tian was very exhausted and badly beaten. He did not understand why the thing that belonged to him attacked him, and decided to ask the person who sold it to him the next time. Then the boy took off his torn shirt, and the protective elements that were used in the fight flew to the floor. And this made him very angry. Still, he understood that something was wrong, and thought that someone had deliberately set an artificial intelligence on him. But then Shen appeared from the shelter and just tried on the strange shoes and gravity cloak and said that Tian was very lucky that the robot did not kill him. But unfortunately, all the talismans of protection and strength lost their effect, and now the young man could fight his brother in an honest way, which he suggested he do. Tian was very angry when he saw his relative. He made a terrible face and was about to attack. Shen rose above the ground, wearing a gravity cloak and armed with a magic wand. The young man used his own personal weapon against his younger brother, and thought that he would be happy if he killed him with it. In fact, he understood that this was not what he wanted, and something else could bring him satisfaction. He shouted to his brother sitting on the floor that he wanted to fight him to the death. He was confused by these words because he was already beaten and tired enough. But the boy went on the offensive again. A battle began in which Tian tried his best to defend himself and survive. A huge hole appeared in the wall of the pavilion after Shen's attack, and his brother asked him why he stopped. The scoundrel said that all the things the boy armed with belonged to him, and he would not be able to use them effectively, and then decided to attack in return. Shen, meanwhile, decided to throw away the wand, which no longer had power because it was discharged, and focused on his brother. And Tian, with a menacing look, rushed to the young man to give him a fatal blow. But after all the artifacts lost their power, the boy threw them on the floor and overtook his brother, striking him so hard that he was left without teeth. Shen felt the powerful force in his hands and was satisfied with it, while the younger brother was on the floor preparing to strike back. The heathen again decided to use the fist of the tiger and angrily rushed into battle. And Shen stood waiting and thought about the fact that his brother still had strength and there was not even a single serious injury, so he clenched his fist with the intention of changing that. When Tian was close to him, the young man struck him hard in the chest. He shouted at the same time that he would not allow any further damage and grabbed his opponent by the throat. Then he said that he never humiliated him when he was a beggar, only helped him. And when they switched roles, he repaid him with insults. He reminded the boy of how he had sent thugs to him and hit him, saying that this was the price of ingratitude. Then he added that he would pay him back for the disrespect he had shown, and struck another blow. Tian flew through the broken wall outside the room, not understanding why he was defeated, because he had practiced so much and had perfected everything. Shen also mentioned that he founded a financial company that bullied people, and the heathen still didn't understand why he couldn't give up in this fight. Tian then yelled for his brother not to pretend to be good, as he was far from winning, and was punched in the face again. After these words, he added that it was because he did not know when to stop, and, grabbing the boy's hand, said that the love of money should not overshadow common sense, and that the father returned him to the family to teach his younger son. Then the young man struck again with a powerful blow, and the opponent flew high into the air, while Shen continued to teach him, reprimanding him for his actions. After Tian was on the ground, the boy admitted that his father was dead after all, and he took his place with the help of the transformation technique. The brother, lying on the grass, heard these words and began to rejoice that he had managed to get rid of the old man. But the boy replied that such methods were unacceptable, and that it would be better if he just beat him. But for committing such a crime because of the inheritance, Shen gave his brother another blow, from which the ground on which he lay cracked and flew in different directions. After that, the young man stopped and turned to his late father, saying that he had avenged him. Shen stood over his brother's body and thought about how sad he was, noting that he wasn't like this before. At the same moment, something shone on Tian's chest and fell to the floor. The young man saw that it was a mirror and picked it up. He looked at it and thought that maybe it was the exchange system, but then he felt it shake and asked his system about it, which replied that it had taken on the sense of fear of its owner. The guy turned to the mirror and asked what it was afraid of, and heard the answer that it does not see the owner, but the system and is therefore afraid of it. Then the boy remarked that the level of his assistant was quite serious, and she replied that she was created to be unique, not just an imitator. Shen also wondered if the mirror was the same exchange system, but it turned out that it was only a part that did not have all the functions, and that was enough for the young man, and he asked how he could master it. Hearing the answer that only a drop of blood was needed, the young man was happy that he would now have two systems, and it turned out that this was impossible, but for the mirror you could get a large amount of money as a recycled material. The artifact shook a lot in the boy's hands, and he could not understand what it was so afraid of. Shen was a little upset that he couldn't use this item for exchange, but his system suggested cancelling the contract between them. He smiled and said that he would not exchange her for any other, because she was created for him. After that, the system offered to recycle the mirror into waste and get 30 million for it, but the guy thought that he could get a lot more if the mirror worked. Shen agonized over whether to get the money or use the artifact, and asked if it was possible for another person to take over the system, and received a positive answer. The young man was very happy, and decided to find someone who would use this mirror to earn money. After some time, the boy arrived at the palace in the form of his father. He was met at the gate by a faithful servant. He reminded the owner that he had not taken his medication, and that he could not be interrupted. But he, approaching the door and taking hold of the handle, simply replied that he knew it. In his father's room, Shenwo opened a drawer and saw a large number of drugs there. A month later, the young man used a robot and arranged everything as if his father died of a heart attack, and in his body, he returned to everyone 2 weeks before this event. Together with him, the body was buried, which, according to the legend of the guy, saved the head last time, and the entire corporation was inherited by Shen Qian. During the burial, it was raining. The young man stood under the umbrella held by Wu and thought about how it hurts him to lose his father, despite the fact that he was very cruel and there was no special connection between them. The boy could not hold back his tears and fell to his knees. In despair, he fell with his forehead to the ground and sincerely sobbed, emotionally addressing his father. The workers stood nearby under umbrellas and waited, but the boy asked them to leave him alone to say goodbye alone. It was already night, and finally a liquid crystal robot began to appear from the grave, which replaced the dead man's body. Finally, after waiting for him, Shen left and ordered the prototype to follow him. The young man sat in the director's office, which he took over after his father's death, and thought that thanks to Vu's help, he could do business, although many consider him unworthy of this title. He looked through the documents and noted that due to the death of a relative and the situation with Cao Tian, the company's affairs were not going well. Due to the loans taken by the corporation to establish work, creditors constantly visit them demanding financial reports. Some problems were solved, but the company was still on the verge of bankruptcy, and since Shen did not understand business, he asked a friend to help him. The girl turned out to be very hard-working, but for her work, she demanded decent pay. But since the young man could not raise her salary, he came up with something else. He gave his friend a mirror to exchange, which he took from his brother. She stared at him for a long time in disbelief. The beauty asked why the boy would not keep this system for himself, but he lied, saying that he wanted to give it to his best employee. Then the young man offered to share the profits and promised her 30%, but she only agreed to 50. Shen was not against such an agreement, and the girl smiled triumphantly, holding the mirror in her hands. This system works on the barter method, so the boy took the valuables he found in Tian, so that Uchuzan would have something to pay for. She stood in front of a pile of various junk and was very surprised to see unusual things. The boy threw her a scroll containing a list of all the artifacts and told her to study them. But the list turned out to be very long. After some time, the girl activated the mirror with a drop of her blood, and a window to other worlds opened before her. Uchijin noted a strange feeling, as if she was controlling the system with the help of her mind, and a seller immediately appeared in front of her and offered to trade again. Then he was a little surprised to see a girl in front of him, and thought that he had chosen the wrong frequency for communication. But then he said that he didn't care who to trade with, and the beauty breathed a sigh of relief, while Shen watched all this and thought that because of her friend's stinginess, it was almost impossible to deceive her. Shoshe noted about himself that sometimes money simply blinds her, and since the exchange takes place through things, he has nothing to worry about, and he went to sleep with his arms outstretched victoriously. In the morning, the young man happily stretched when entering the room, and was glad that he finally managed to get some sleep. But when he saw the girl sitting in front of the portal, he was frightened by the look of her tired eyes. The friend replied that she stayed up all night trying to make a good exchange and got a very useful thing in the form of a strange figurine. It turns out that it was a device for cleaning pills, and the drugs he created could double the strength of the body. Uchijin grabbed the boy's hand and pulled him somewhere. She began to explain how this thing works, and that it has 3 effects. The first is that you cannot laugh while taking the pills. Otherwise, it will be difficult to stop. The second is indigestion. And the third side effect is an irresistible desire to sleep after the doubling of strength is over. But the young man got angry and began to repeat that this thing was defective and absolutely unnecessary. But the girl said that the laughing pill can be used. It is enough just not to laugh. And the boy admitted that she was right. The girl found out who exactly is involved in the development of liquid crystal robots that can change shape and size. The previous prototype used a lot of energy, so Yu Chijun decided that it was defective and bought a robot of another generation, which was less energy-consuming. The young man turned on this figurine and pressed the laugh button to receive the corresponding pills. Shen pondered that these pills could not be used to harden the body, especially since they had side effects. The boy was also surprised by the ridiculous position in which the device made its pills. The young man took the pill in his hands and thought about the fact that he needed to find a subject who could test them, and then thought about how he could make money from these pills. But at that moment, the voice of a friend was heard behind the door, who said that someone was looking for the boy. The principal of the town's high school came to visit. He and Shen were sitting in the living room, and the girl brought them drinks. The man asked the young man if he had rested well lately, but the young man did not answer, only asked why he had come. It turns out that an exchange tournament between schools was to be held soon, and the director hoped that the young man would take part in it. But he said while sipping tea that he was still on vacation. The man now apologized for the suspension and explained that there was nothing he could do, because the leadership was under the influence of Cao Tian, and that he actually considered Shen an outstanding student. The guy confirmed that his younger brother was to blame for everything and offered to drink tea first and then solve the issue with the tournament. Then the director leaned over and offered 1 million yen for second place, and the boy immediately agreed. The young man poured tea for the director and said that it would be easy to take second place and that he underestimated him. But the man replied that although it is a great honor to have a certificate at such an age, there are also very strong students in other schools this year. It turns out that among them there are level 3 contestants, and one also has an E1 certificate. Then Shen asked if the competition would really take place between basic martial arts schools. The annual tournament between the best educational institutions of 9 cities has begun. Last year, Yangbei School was represented by Cao Tian, who won second place, and this year, Shen, who is stronger than his brother, is fighting for them. Last year's winner this time also has a fighter with such a certificate as a youngster. In the training hall, a boy was sitting in the lotus position with his eyes closed, meditating. An opponent came up to him from behind and brought his hand in to hit him in the back of the head. It was a training session. The teacher gave some advice to the student and said that this time his concentration was a bit higher. The man also added that it is still impossible to reach the level of the righteous mind, and it is better to train the third level without adding anything. The boy turned to the coach, calling him his father, but he waved his hand, not letting him say anything, and noted that he must be calm in order to master the heavenly palm technique that is passed down in their family. The man said that there was a Shen contestant in the tournament who would be a test for the boy and turned his back on his son. Finally, he added that it was worth starting training, and the boy raised his angry gaze. Then the events unfolded in the school of the city of Yangnan. One of the participants of the match sat with his head bowed in exhaustion. The teacher praised him for his efforts and for the fact that he had already mastered 3 basic martial arts techniques. And then the student asked to try his hand again and again started a training match with the mentor, promising not to let him down in the tournament. And someone at that moment was enjoying what a beautiful chicken he had, and immediately lowered a heavy knife on it. The guy with the gun stood next to the killed bird and thought about the fact that his system only needs kills, and the stronger the victim, the more points are counted. The boy's system could not directly act on the development of fighting skills, but he could use the points to improve the quality of the body. Then the young man, brandishing a bloody knife, thought that even though he had the first level and thanks to this system, he was even stronger than the third. With a wild look, he touched the blade with his tongue and thought that for more power he must kill someone stronger. On the road outside the city was driving a car in which the students were. One of the classmates praised Chejan for his abilities. Then I asked my friend why he constantly helps the police. Does he really want to become a superhero? And he was embarrassed and said that he was doing what he had to do. Shen sat in the front seat next to the driver and yawned, covering his face with his hand. The teacher who was driving the car warned the young man not to be too bold at the tournament, even though he has a certificate. The guy replied that he never underestimates his opponent and always gives his all. Then the coach added that he should not consider the opponents as weaklings because they are masters of martial arts, and that last year the one who was defeated by Tian was too young. He also remembered another student who could withstand the battle well. These two would be the young man's most dangerous opponents, and the young man nodded in understanding, thinking that he had gotten a chance to test his pills. The car stopped, the students got out and saw no arena except the lake in front of them. But the teacher said to just wait, and after a while, many people appeared on the shore. The trainers began to approach each other and greet each other, exchanging polite remarks. The girls immediately surrounded Shen and began their courtship, while the boys standing aside discussed who could take the first place. The young man was happy for the attention from the girls, and his friends discussed how much effort he had to put in to reach such a level. Chejan had a strange feeling. His system had locked onto the assassin's system, which was her direct enemy and needed to be completely absorbed. The young man turned and saw the boy, who at that moment also felt that there was a hero system nearby that was hostile to him. The students looked at each other and Chejan noticed the evil look, and that student realized that there were other systems. The killer thought that one of the strongest young men was his real opponent. At the same moment, everyone present heard a strange sound and looked up. These were helicopters, flying, in which there were participants from 2 martial arts schools. Instead of landing, they created a bridge of blood energy, stunning everyone. Fighters appeared at this crossing, and their teacher had a rather defiant look and was convinced of his victory. The instructor of another school, who was also standing on the bloody bridge, warned his colleague not to rush to conclusions. But the man was, as always, very self-confident, and the other participants noticed it. When they all came down, they were greeted by the teacher of the school, Yang Bei, followed by the others. Shen was approached by one of the participants saying that he hoped he would not disappoint him. Another teacher was giving instructions to his ward about a duel with the young man, saying that he had a strong third level. Those present again raised their heads to the mountain and saw a man floating in the air who ordered everyone to move away from the lake. Everyone was stunned by what they saw and started asking questions about who this man was. Shen was no exception, and also inquired from his teacher. He replied that this man is the director of the Central Martial Arts Association, and he is an absolute master. Chizhan admired this man and hoped that one day he too could achieve this level of skill. Those present were once again asked to move away from the lake, and the man flying in the air got to work. He pointed his hand at the water, and a huge palm print appeared in the middle of it. At the same moment, this hand seemed to take something out of the water and easily lifted it high up. Those present were surprised to see when the man raised the island that was hidden under the lake, and the guy with the killer system thought that he would also like to train like all the normal contestants. Chizhan thought that if he had such a level of strength, he would be able to do a lot of good deeds. And Shen, in turn, began to dream of possessing many small levels and obtaining a heavenly one. The island with the arena in the middle belongs to 9 schools, and before the competition, the director takes it out from under the water and then hides it back. All participants live in a hotel nearby and go to the island directly during the competition. Shen sat on the sofa and read the rules of the competition where each participant could challenge a student from another school. One round was held every day, and there were 15 of them in total. The young man read that participants get their numbers by drawing lots, and the higher number can choose an opponent first. The winner takes all the points of the loser. The guy thought that all the participants were his potential customers for testing pills, but he couldn't sell them by showing his face, so he decided to come up with a new persona. After that, the guy found out the contacts of all the fighters, bought a new SIM card, and sent everyone a message advertising his drugs. One of the participants received such a message, although at first he thought that a girl had written to him. The guy didn't really believe the information he read and got angry and wrote something rude. When he replied to the message in a rude manner, Shen was not jokingly angry, realizing that he was not believed. He wrote back a bad wish and decided that he would give this participant a hard time. Then the young man thought to just send everyone the address, and if someone comes, it will be good. If not, he will simply forget about his idea. At night, 3 guys came to the place that Shen pointed out and asked if there would be any problems with his pills. A young man, or rather an assistant, was waiting for them standing on a stone and wearing a rooster mask on his head. He held out his palm and the soldiers saw 3 pills on it. They looked at each other with the thought of whether to take them or not. Nevertheless, they took the medicine and asked why he didn't want money, thinking that he was a bit stupid, and at the same moment the alchemist disappeared. Shen was a little upset that so few men had come, but he was very careful and used a transformation master in this matter. The robot returned to its original position, and the young man thought that, although no one believed in his pills, tomorrow everyone would understand that he could not do without them. The first day of the competition has arrived. The teachers gathered to draw lots and determine the serial numbers. Yanbei's school received the first number for their contestants' competition during the draw. A classmate of Shen and Chizhan asked them to let him pass first, and the friends agreed to stay and cheer. The boy showed himself well in the fight and beat his opponent well. He got down on one knee and surrendered to the mercy of the winner, thereby raising the status of the school. The coach praised the young man, saying that he noticed how well he trained and what he achieved. Then he turned to his other students and told them to save their strength and gradually gain points while waiting for the last day of the tournament. Chizhan also performed well in the ring. His opponent was unable to break through the defense and was defeated. The young men bowed to each other and thanked each other for the sparring. The loser admitted that he was weaker. Everyone discussed the victory of Chizhan and thought about the fact that Shen is even stronger, and it was interesting how he would prove himself. But the young man entered the ring and was a little confused, because he did not know who was chosen for him to fight. And then the young man turned a little with his eyes closed and decided to choose at random, just by poking his finger. He opened his eyes and saw a boy in front of him who laughed at his offer of pills. The green-haired contestant really didn't want to fight Shen, because he was afraid of this match, and everything was clear in advance for the audience as well. The participant bowed his head and quietly asked the young man to fight a little easier than usual. But he replied that it doesn't matter who has what level, and in the match you have to give your all, and the other participants also supported the boy. Potential opponents watching the match began to respect Shen after his words. Then the opponent asked the young man not to hit him at least in the face, and the boy agreed with a mischievous smile. The match began, the opponent received a good push, and eventually fell to the floor with a request not to hit anymore, because he was giving up. The vanquished was displeased that Shen did not hold back his words, not to punch him in the face. But the young man had to learn his insolence. And then I thought that I had already seen this type of people who treat others badly. And that's why I chose him for a fight. A fight took place between two rivals and the stronger of them won. The audience admired his skill, but one girl remarked that he was inferior in strength to only one of the members, Xiao Chen. After some time, he also won his battle, then bowed his head and thanked his opponent for the duel. The two strongest contestants exchanged glances, and the audience kept gossiping that only Shen could match them both. And he stood aside and was focused on his thoughts about the pills that he tried to test. But the students did not use them. It was especially a pity for one loser who challenged a too strong opponent with green hair. It was the turn of another young man who also bought pills. He carefully stepped on the stairs leading to the ring. The boy was able to win on his own, and Shen was disappointed that he didn't use his drugs as well. But the third guy who bought doping from Shenxian finally came to sparring. He also did not trust the power of the pills, and the alchemist was ready to explode with anger at the fact that he does not manage to test them. But then the young man heard how the recently defeated participant again wants to challenge the master who defeated him. One of the trainers tried to calm him down so he wouldn't do something stupid, but he replied that he didn't use his full power on purpose, and now he wants revenge. Then Shen Qian realized that he had finally used the medicine and was happy waiting to see the effect. The young man with green hair prepared to spank his opponent once more. He quickly jumped into the ring, without even using the stairs. With a defiant smile, he beckoned his opponent with his fingers and said that he would teach him. But the boy shouted in anger that now he will show who the teacher really is, and rushed into battle. This time the young man acted quickly and much stronger than last time, and struck his enemy. He used it. An uppercut from some opponent was barely protected, and the guys jumped away from each other for a moment. The young man with green hair could not understand what was happening and why the former weakling became so strong. But he made sure that the pill he received was effective. The participants continued the battle, and the previous winner wanted to prove again that he was not his equal. But the opponent quickly jumped back and dodged, finding himself behind him. A serious struggle began between these participants. But in the end, the young man who took the auxiliary pill was victorious, and his opponent lay exhausted on the ground. The public could not believe what had happened, because the boy was clearly weaker last time, and everyone was interested in how he was able to gain such strength in a few hours. The newly minted winner really wanted to be happy, but he remembered the salesman's advice that you shouldn't laugh. The beaten competitor was carried out of the ring by men in white coats, and Shenxian looked at him and mentally thanked him that thanks to him his pill had been tested. Then the other participants, who also bought the pills but did not risk taking them, looked at each other, realizing that they were still working. Finally, it was the turn of the young man with the killer system. He was choosing his opponent and could not make up his mind. Ta suddenly pointed a finger at Chazan, thinking to himself that he was his only real enemy. The young men started the match by exchanging friendly remarks before it. The assassin decided to attack first and used his hand-to-hand combat technique. One of the teachers said that the exercise was too simple, but the other replied that the young man's strength was no lower than level 3. The two favorites watching the fight were stunned by the killing lust of this contestant. But Chajan resisted such a strong blow and remained intact. Even the teacher rolled his eyes in surprise. The assassin attacked again, raising his leg to strike, but his opponent was able to defend himself. The teachers discussed the techniques used by the fighters and came to the conclusion that Chajan is still stronger. In the end, the young man was able to deal a serious blow to his opponent, and his friends were happy that the boy was winning. Each attack of the opponent, Chajan reflected, and the killer thought about how many good deeds the boy had to do to achieve such power. The boy could not afford to lose and used the strongest blow he was capable of. But the opponent again used a strong defense, and the heathen could not break through it. Instead, Chajan managed to contract his enemy and threw him away. Then he quickly struck again, and the opponent thought that the young man was too strong, and he would not be able to overcome him. In the end, the killer surrendered, falling to his knees, and Chajan accepted the congratulations of his comrades and fans. But the defeated participant continued to look at his enemy's trail and understood that he had to somehow defeat his system. In the evening, when everyone returned to the hotel, Shen's phone started ringing with messages from people wanting to buy his pills. The young man was satisfied. Even the participant with green hair, who was rude to him at first, wanted to fix everything and was ready to pay more. But Shen didn't like flatterers and decided that he changed his mind too late and then blocked his number. Those wishing to buy doping complained that the seller does not use transfer to a card and that it is very inconvenient for them to carry cash with them. One of the buyers even brought and gave the alchemist his bank card, which contained funds, so that he could be convinced of his honesty. At the end of the trade, the young man sat and counted the money received, thinking of raising the price. But Shen was not going to reveal his identity, so he did not want to accept any translations. His robot took the original position and lay on the ground next to him. Then the boy turned his face in the other direction and thought that he should be even more careful and transfer all the work to the robot. The second day of the tournament has begun. There were already 2 opponents in the arena who were not inferior to each other. The teacher said, watching the fight of his ward, that his opponent was also quite skilled. Another teacher, looking at the statistics of the participants, noticed that the boy performed much better in the ring than was indicated on the paper. A colleague agreed with him, noting that the strength of many participants does not correspond to the previously declared. And at the same moment, his favorite was on the ground, and the opponent thought to himself that he barely had time to finish the fight, because the effect of the pill had almost passed. Everyone began to praise the coach of the winner, and he only smiled, understanding where his student's strength came from. Another seemingly weak participant challenged the green-haired strong man. Much to his annoyance, the young man thought that because of the previous defeat, everyone now thought that they could beat him and decided that he would not mind taking away their points. But again, something happened that no one expected, and a completely unremarkable participant won this time as well. The defeated fighter was sitting with his back propped up on a stone. He guessed that the participants who overpowered him had taken pills and declared that he wanted a doping test. The teachers consulted among themselves and decided that he was right, because there are really a lot of misunderstandings about the real strength of some participants. Then one of the trainers pointed his fingers at 3 fighters and ordered them to follow him. And some were glad that they didn't have time to take the pill even though they bought it the day before. Enough time has passed. The other participants are already tired of waiting for those who went to take the test to return. But one of them shouted joyfully when he saw them approaching. The teacher said that they had conducted an examination and found no illegal drugs, but the young man with green hair disagreed with their words. Then both instructors sternly asked if he doubted them, and the boy calmed down a little, and only Shen knew what was the matter, because his pills did not belong to this world, and no device could fix them. But this scandal will benefit him because now everyone who wanted to buy them understood that the drugs cannot be detected. The competition continued, and a guy with a dark system entered the arena and immediately won. His opponent was taken away, badly injured by the ambulance doctors, and as Shen looked at him, he thought that this strange disciple was very cruel. One of the young men shouted at the winner and accused him of attempted murder, but the boy, wiping his hands, replied that the opponent was injured due to his own weakness. Then this young man challenged the killer to the ring, and he was confident that he could win because the opponent had no system. Both participants were very strong, each in his own way had special fighting skills. But after a few minutes, the cruel participant was on his knees in the middle of the arena and could not believe that he was going to lose. His opponent said that he was not worthy to fight him and added that only one participant was worthy of the match. Shen was just looking at the boy, noting that he was interesting enough to fight. At that moment, the young men met their eyes, and the participant standing in the arena added that Shen was also a worthy opponent for him. Shen once again had the opportunity to choose an opponent, but almost all the participants were worried that his choice would not fall on them. In the end, the boy decided to take the one who didn't buy enhancement pills from him, and poked a finger at one of the young men. The boy's teacher was angry that he chose his ward, because he was the trump card of the school. But he was only level 2, and he had no chance to stand up to Shen. The coach ordered the boy to give his all because he is the pride of the city, and the young man promised to do his best. Shen invited the opponent to strike first, and the boy immediately engaged in a duel. He used his best technique to hit his opponent as accurately as possible. Shen Xian noticed that the boy's strike was very accurate and strong, but suggested that he feel the difference and struck back. The opponent bent down, holding his chest. He did not understand why the same technique felt much stronger when hitting a young man. Shun explained that the boy has the wrong stance, which is why his shots are not so perfect, although he is developing well. Then the young man looked at his hands and thought that really, after reaching the second level, his strength did not increase much. It turns out that this is the reason. Then he stood up again and asked the stronger student to teach him something else useful. The young man decided to demonstrate everything in practice and dealt a strong blow to the enemy. The teachers watched the fight and noted Shen Qian's outstanding skills. One of them even envied that another school had such a student. Meanwhile, his opponent was completely exhausted and got down on one knee and admitted his defeat. He bowed to the winner and thanked him for the instructions, which were very valuable, and he good-naturedly waved back and left the arena. The teacher of the defeated student was very unhappy with his action and was angry that he had given up. Later at the hotel, he reprimanded his ward for thanking his opponent for the battle in which he was defeated, humiliating their school. But the boy tried to explain that Shen gave a lot of good advice that was of great value. Then the coach slapped the young man in the face for daring to contradict his mentor. Next, the teacher gave the example of 2 other students who usually did not show up in training, but won in matches. Then he approached them and cunningly asked how it was that they became so strong. The young men tensed up and began to explain, as if during the competition they decided not to hold back their strength. But the angry teacher grabbed one of them by the face and said that he understood perfectly well what the matter was and asked what they were taking. He began to grab the boys by their clothes and ask for the truth, but they refused as much as they could to the last. But in the end, the coach found the pills, and both students were on their knees sobbing. Then the coach decided to take a look at this master of alchemy, about whom the students had told, and teach him. And Shen that same night gave instructions to his worker, whom he was going to send to the underground pill trade again. The master of reincarnation took someone else's likeness, and the boy, giving the goods, said to sell to anyone, and if someone wanted to rob him, to destroy the pills. The robot left the room, and the young man shouted after him that he was waiting for the one with pockets full of money. Not much time passed. Shen was just training when the reincarnation master returned, and the young man thought that he had sold everything. The robot was completely discharged, and the boy, connecting it to the charging station, remembered that he had fully charged it. Then he confusedly turned on the master and began to ask him what happened. He created a projection of the last memories before switching to energy-saving mode. On the screen, he saw an unknown person in a mask who attacked the robot, asking about the martial arts he practices. The man realized that he was only a fifth-level master and dealt him a heavy blow. The robot flew a long distance and fell, and the robot was glad that it did not leave behind any traces and disappeared after taking the pills. The young man was unpleasantly surprised that his job was defeated with the advantage of the force that was involved, and realized that this was a teacher who definitely had bad intentions if he was ready to kill for pills. The young man was worried by the fact that among the teachers there is a very cruel person who can become very dangerous for everyone. The third day of the competition arrived. Shen sat and thought that today's battles had gone quickly, without any special tricks. The young man watched the fight and thought that you could hardly find the person who stole the pills from his robot. A new match began. The participants greeted each other with a fist bump and went to different sides of the arena. The fighter who took the pill lost and worried that the effect of the drug would soon end, and he would never be able to land a good blow. But suddenly, the boy fell to his knees right in the ring and grabbed his stomach, and his trainer started screaming, not understanding what was happening to him. The participant asked to let him go to the toilet because he could not stand it, but the coach did not allow him to leave the arena. Then the young man bent down with the last of his strength, and everything he had been holding back for so long flew into his teacher's face. One of the mentors, looking at what was happening, mockingly asked if this was their famous martial arts master. The coach, smeared from head to toe, threatened his student that he would get even with him when they returned to the hotel. Then he stood up again and asked the stronger student to teach him something else useful. Shen looked at this event in surprise and thought that someone had made a mistake and eaten the wrong pill. And then he thought that he had finally found the pill thief, and filmed on his phone how the teacher was dragging his student from the arena. In the room, the boy gave the video to his colleague, who, after analyzing the appearance, confirmed that this teacher was the attacker. Then the young man decided that the man would not get away with such an act, and he would soon regret it. In the evening, one of the teachers went for a run, and the coach, who turned out to be a thief, was already waiting for him. He joined the man as if by accident and offered to run together. When the men stopped, Teacher Vu, who was a thief, started showering his colleague with compliments, much to his surprise. Then he went even further and began to touch the man in a strange way, and this scared him to the extreme. He ambiguously licked his lips and unbuttoned his shirt, saying that only a colleague could warm his heart and share his feelings. But the other coach got very angry and started yelling for him to get off of him. And then he turned and ran as fast as he could from the pervert, who was shouting after him about his feelings. But in reality, it was not the teacher, but Shen, who changed his appearance, and after everything that happened, bent down and began to spit in disgust. He wiped his face with his hand and thought that it was still worth it to continue with his revenge plan. And the frightened teacher, who barely escaped from his colleague, was just about to take a shower, but still could not come to his senses from what happened to him. The man went into the bathroom and thought that he should stay away from his colleague, and at the same moment, the transformation master Sheena crawled into his room. Then he realized that the young man was also a martial artist and jumped back, asking if he needed money. In a daze, he went out to see who was arguing and noticed that the things that had recently been there had disappeared. And then he saw his lover running away through the balcony, holding the stolen item in his hands. The man got angry and rushed after him, shouting insults in the direction of the thief-suitor. But the real teacher at that moment was in the forest and was waiting for the seller of pills. He was holding in his hands the phones of the students in which the meeting place was discussed. At the same moment, someone called him, and looking around, he saw an angry colleague running towards him. He ran closer and put some red underwear on the coach's head, but the man did not understand what was the matter, only threatened him with his fist. The man did not understand what was happening, but in a moment the same teacher started running towards him again, and this time he was wrapped in only one towel. The teacher called his colleague a pervert and, jumping high above the ground, began to use his technique on him. Wu looked up in surprise, not expecting what happened next, because the man hit him so hard that the stones flew in different directions. Shen, meanwhile, was standing behind a tree and was impressed by Coach Liu's skill, then took out his phone and started filming. Teacher Vu staggered down the hall, with one hand twisted and the other holding a crutch, thinking about how unlucky he was. When the man went outside, he saw people jumping near the board. He wanted to know what was happening, but the students who recognized him started looking at him mockingly. Then the coach saw a poster on which he allegedly accused his colleague of not only breaking his heart, but also maiming him. Liu appeared immediately behind the teacher and laughingly spoke to him, while he tried to justify himself to him. But he replied that he had been too merciful to him yesterday, and this time he would not accept an explanation. At the same moment, a scream was heard in the air. Teacher Vu gathered his things and took the suitcase, upset and humiliated, and went to the exit. When he was walking along the corridor, he heard two female students gossiping about him and making fun of him, but they stopped immediately when they saw him. He walked past the girls with his head bowed and thought that his reputation was completely ruined. The man walked along the road past the forest and realized that he could no longer be here, despite the competition. But suddenly, an unknown man in a rooster mask appeared behind him and hit the man on the head with a stick. A few minutes later, Shen was standing in the middle of a forest clearing, counting money. The teacher's belongings were scattered nearby, so he repaid him for stealing the pills. The boy noted that the man was very poor and had little cash with him, and the young man did not have access to a bank card. However, he found pills that were much better than those produced by Shen Qian himself. The man also had a book on martial arts with him, but it was not very useful for the boy, and he was disappointed. The young man opened the pamphlet and began to read. There were some strange tips and nothing about practicing any technique. Then Shen took with him everything that was useful to him and hurried back, because the tournament was about to start soon. A new participant just entered the ring. It was one of the strongest fighters who participated this year. The boy stopped in the middle of the arena and decided to challenge Shen Qian's worthy opponent. The audience cheered, expecting a spectacular duel. But the young man tensed up a bit. He did not plan to enter into a serious fight on the fourth day of the competition. But his opponent, with a good-natured look, began to explain why he made such a choice. It turns out that he planned to go to the fourth level, and he needed a strong opponent for practice. Then Shen Qian warmed up, realizing that he would still have to fight the boy. And then he headed to the ring, saying that he wanted to see with his own eyes what one of the best students was capable of. The rivals went to different sides of the arena and began preparations for a spectacular duel. Both boys used the same technique, striking with their fists at the same time. Spectators felt a strong return from this confrontation, and the teachers even remembered their past, noting that these two fighters deserved to be called the best. Then the guys resorted to the next technique, and Shen's opponent thought that he was really a genius, and he gave his all with every blow. The fight between the young men continued, and none of them showed weakness. But then Qian noticed that his opponent had revealed himself. Then the boy made a confident lunge, and unexpectedly for the opponent, delivered a powerful blow. But he managed to turn everything in his favor and hit back, which the enemy was still able to block. After that, the young men jumped into different directions again. Xiao Chen remarked that he did not think that the young man was so good at hand-to-hand combat. Then Shen suggested that the enemy right now find out who is stronger and apply their strongest blow to each. The boy added that there was no point in fighting further because they were of the same level, and it was better to save their strength for a duel with another strong participant who was just watching them. Then the opponent agreed to the young man's proposal and decided to do as he suggested. He thought to himself that although he did not belong to an outstanding family of practitioners, he had the talent to perfect any technique. The fight was watched by an opponent who thought that the boy was good at several exercises and brought them to the highest level. Meanwhile, the young man changed his position to a new one thinking to himself that there are no bad techniques. It's just that people don't know how to develop them well enough. The trainers were also fascinated by the young man and noted that he has a real talent in martial arts. Meanwhile, Xiao Chen changed his practice and attacked and shouted at Shen, which can be both weak and strong at the same time. And he, for his part, used a quick, bloody blow of a hawk and rushed to attack. The opponents jumped high into the air and struck each other, and when they landed in the ring, Shen remained standing, and his opponent bent to his knees. The boy stood up trembling and turned to the winner, acknowledging his superiority and accepting his defeat. Shen thanked for the duel, and the audience began to shout congratulations to the undefeated young man. The audience recognized that, in addition to another contender for victory, the boy is a real genius. The teachers were still fascinated by the fighting talent of the young men, and everyone chose their favorite for themselves. Then, one of the teachers admitted that Xiao Chen didn't have enough refined movements, and because of that, he lost. But his opponent's technique was really amazing. And the winner just walked and thought about the fact that his opponent was very strong and thought about how many such talents exist in the world. The young man was interested in whether there would be such strong applicants when entering college, and how great the strength of another outstanding fighter in these competitions is. Shen put his hands in his pockets and raised his face to the wind, deciding for himself to go through this fascinating path to the end. The fifth day of the competition began. Yesterday's opponent approached the young man and thanked him for the match, because thanks to him, he was able to reach the fourth level. The young man smiled and congratulated him on his new achievement, thinking to himself that this fighter also has a system, but his own answered that it was not, and the boy was surprised. He watched as he climbed into the ring and thought that his strength had greatly increased, and that even this year's favorite would not be able to defeat him. It was no surprise to anyone that Xiao Chen challenged the strongest member to test his new strength. The match was quite tense and spectacular, and both participants were worthy of victory. After an hour, the fight finally ended, and the victory went to Van Po Chun, last year's #1. Shen was in his room reading. Now he has implemented an exchange system of pills for techniques and received as many as 3 books. It occurred to him to reach as high as level 6 with the new exercises, but unfortunately he had too little time left. He sat on the sofa and looked intently at the book that he had stolen from the teacher, and thought that in order to win, you have to take risks. The book talked about push-ups from the floor, which can increase your own strength tenfold. He also read information that this is only theoretical knowledge that has nothing to do with practice and was founded even before the use of energy, qi. The boy thought about what he had learned because the ancient practices were meaningless and decided to postpone this question for the time being. The next day, Shen was standing in a group of students, and one of them said that Van Po had also reached the 4th level, and then asked the young man if he had also raised his. The boy looked at the winner and understood why the director demanded at least 2nd place from him, because it was difficult to compete with such masters. Then he looked at his hands and remembered the heavenly imprints on his palms, thinking that it would be good to take 1st place. Shen sparred with one of the contestants and expected to be able to practice well, but his opponent decided to accept defeat without entering the battle, as he understood that there was no chance of winning. But the young man was disappointed. He needed a real fight to practice push-ups and began to convince his opponent to join him in a duel. The young man made it clear that one cannot reach the top by refusing to fight a stronger opponent. He recognized that there was a big difference between their powers and then got into a push-off position and suggested that they compete that way. And then he said that in the next rounds, with everyone who challenges him, he will accept this position. And the other fighters thought that he was just mocking them. The fans were delighted with such a turn, and the teacher and friends began to worry a little, but his opponent agreed to a real match. Shen began his exercise while his opponent furiously prepared to strike him. The enemy attacked the boy, but he managed to dodge while continuing to push. Spectators liked such a spectacle. Some discussed the young man's act, and some counted the prince. The strongest of the candidates didn't even watch what was happening because he was bored, and Shen continued to count. The young man lasted only 7 push-ups and responded to the attack of the opponent with a palm strike. From that confrontation, the opponent flew to a great distance directly above the heads of the surprised observers. The victory was recognized for Shen Qian, but he was very tired and thought that if it were not for the weakness of the opponent, he would have lost, because it is very difficult to push back and fight at the same time. The 7th day of the competition came. The participants who took pills could increase their strength, but fighters with the same level did not have an advantage over each other and only stretched the time of the match. The last fight was taking too long, and one of the teachers just told the boys to stop. This effect of the pills made them very popular. The young man's phone was bursting with messages wanting to buy them. Shen held pills and bank cards in his hands. The last trades exceeded the previous ones by several times. The more capable students ended up at the top of the ranking and continued to win, while Van Po generally beat everyone with one hand. Xiao Chen also kept up and challenged all but the 2 strongest members. Shen continued to compete with level 1 students to practice push-ups, even though it was quite difficult. Inside the ranking was Chizhan and his potential enemy with his killer system. The latter challenged the second participant in strength, but was defeated and very angry at the same time. And at the end of the list were those who abused pills, but their effect did not bring them the desired victory. Shen continued to practice during the fight, and sometimes he even had to push off on one finger. He even tried doing more push-ups to see if it would help increase his strength, and when he got the hang of it, he started challenging stronger opponents. But on the 14th day of the competition, the young man still managed to reach the first level. He used a blow that broke the ground under the opponent's feet. Meanwhile, the young man flew high into the air, flipped and landed near his defeated opponent. Late that evening, Shen was lying on the ground in the middle of the forest, worried that his system had not responded to the new technique. He thought that the other contestants had a very good foundation for the competition, and he couldn't figure out if his new exercise was having an effect. The young man decided to try one last time, and no longer hoped to take first place in these competitions. After the 10th squeeze, he quickly flew up and then commanded down. And when he landed, he put all the power he was capable of into his palm, hitting the ground with it so that the stones flew apart. The boy was hanging in the air with his eyes closed, his system finally recognizing the new technique. Shen was very happy. He brushed off the dirt from his clothes and thought that the last blow was the strongest, and it was the one that allowed him to go beyond his capabilities. The young man once again checked with the system whether this exercise does not use chi energy, and learned that it is the same as the transformation technique. Then he asked about the cost of upgrading, and when he found out the price, he was scared, because it was much more expensive than improving the hawk strike. But then he thought that if the information in the book was true, then this technique was worth cultivating, and asked the system to increase it with the money he received from selling pills. He assumed the lotus position, and the process began by deducting the required amount of money from the account. After a minute, everything was over, but the young man looked confusedly at his hands and did not feel any changes in his body. Then he realized that he had to take a position for a push-up, and felt how his speed became much higher, but he did not feel it while standing. The young man climbed up again and lowered his palm to the ground, creating a very strong shock. When the dust cleared, it turned out that he was standing in a pit that he himself had created, and the feeling that filled him was very pleasant, and he closed his eyes with pleasure. It was already late at night, but Shen was too excited to sleep, and went out to find Chizhan to practice. But the comrade that night had a meeting with his adversary and was with him on the seashore. The young man tried to convince the killer that they don't have to be enemies, and that everyone chooses which side to fight on. His opponent could barely contain his anger because he was very fed up with the notes the boy was reading. Chizhan did not tire of repeating that he could turn to the path of good, but the young man said that he had already killed too many animals to return to the righteous path. The hero continued his sermon, but the pagan decided that he was deceiving in order to take over his system, and became even more convinced that they were enemies. The killer listened to the young man, but he held his fist behind his back and thought that he had already taken the pills and was ready to fight to the death. The young man thought that he was able to convince the pagan and held out his hand as a sign of peace. But he replied that he had killed a man and stunned the hero with this confession. The killer was already ready to attack, but a voice calling Chijan was heard, and both young men turned their heads. Shen approached them, waving his hand, and said that he had been looking for his friend for a long time. The pagan was unhappy that they had been interrupted. He turned and walked away, telling the young man to find him when he was free, and the friend asked Chijan what happened between the boys. But the friend replied that despite their friendship, he could not tell about some difficulties, and it was better for him to leave. At the end, he added that Shen should beware of the heathen, and the young man would watch his friend and understand that he also had his secrets. The last day of the competition has arrived. Two of the strongest contestants, Van Pochun and Shen, were in the ring. Spectators argued about who would be the winner. Their opinions divided between the two fighters. The teachers excitedly watched the young men and noted that these two were much stronger than they were when they were the same age. The young man who ranked third admired Shen's calmness and looked forward to seeing him in battle. Van Po turned to his opponent and told him that he would lose if he tried to get into a choke position again. But the young man threw up his hands and answered that it was in this position that he had the greatest strength. Then Shen took his usual position and invited the opponent to attack, thinking that he did not use the pills this time because he wanted to compete fairly. The audience was very indignant when they saw that the boy had taken up his act again and was ready to fight with the strongest participant lying on the floor. The instructors were also surprised by such an act of the young man and looked at each other. Number 3 also tensed up when he realized that the young man was seriously going to fight in this position. Van Pochun bowed his head and closed his eyes in disbelief that the opponent really had more strength during push-ups. He assumed a fighting stance and said that he would not hold back, and that the young man himself was responsible for his decision. Shen lay on the floor and watched his strong opponent in rapt attention. All the teachers also considered him a favorite and a real talent. Then Van Pochun shouted to the young man to be careful and rush into battle, and the enemy only had time to notice that it was very fast. The favorite's technique was very refined, and the young man had to dodge his palm. He realized that he would have to speed up the push-up to gain the necessary strength, and began the countdown. Fans watched the match, and some even thought Shen was a psycho. Meanwhile, the enemy quickly launched a new attack. His palm came very close to Shen's body, but Shen continued to push away regardless. Then the opponent used another technique, and the boy realized that he would not be able to dodge and put his fist up for defense. The young men pushed their hands together with all their strength and jumped in different directions, taking their original positions. Shen had already done half of the push-ups and realized that it would be very difficult to resist further, so he decided to dodge as often as possible. He simply crawled as far away from his opponent as possible and immediately did the 6th push-up. His teacher, who watched from the stand, noted the strength of the boy, but could not understand why it was so strange to fight. And Van Po at the same moment attacked from behind, again, and Shen could only guess what was happening behind. He made the 8th push-up and put his leg back to repel the opponent's attack. The opponent flew back a little, and this gave the young man the opportunity to repeat the exercise for the 9th time. He quickly covered the distance back, and being away from the enemy, completed his warm-up. After the 10th push-up, the boy smiled triumphantly and easily got off the ground. He shouted at Van Po that he didn't believe in his technique, and he raised his head and looked at the boy, realizing that he was going to feel the blow. The young man approached his opponent from above, using the heavenly palm technique. The instructors tensed in disbelief that Shen was about to deliver such a skillful strike. Van Po looked at his opponent and felt the force flying at him from the mountain, as if the sky itself was falling. He thought that Shen had not disappointed him in his skill, and if he hadn't raised his level, he definitely wouldn't have been able to repel the young man's attack. But he was sure that he now had enough strength to meet the opponent's heavenly palm. He felt ready to face the heavens and prepared to use the secret technique of his technique. But at the same moment, an incredible force descended on him, which destroyed the ground under the fighter's feet. Even the teacher screamed out the boy's name in fear, realizing that he was lucky, and Shen's mentor shouted with satisfaction that the young man had won, although he was very surprised, like everyone else. Spectators could not believe that they were finally able to defeat the invincible young man. Everyone shouted that they now had a new king and wondered how he managed to cope in his strange position. Number 3 was also stunned and wondered if he would be able to stand up to the winner in such a battle. Yang Bei School was declared the winner, and a banquet was held for the participants on the last day of the meeting. Shen became a real star. Everyone wanted his attention, and girls asked for his phone number. Chajan sat at the table with the others and watched the killer, who was avoiding everyone. The young man was interested in whether he had really killed someone. His friend saw that the boy was worried about something and asked about it, but the boy replied that he was fine. The former favorite sat at the table next to Shen, his bandaged leg resting on a chair, and questioned him about the unusual technique. The young man replied that he had warned everyone that he was training like that, and the opponent replied that he would not let him win next time. And the third-place contestant also demanded rematch after he honed the next level. Shen held a glass of Coca-Cola in his hand and said that even though they don't drink alcohol, they talk nonsense, and then stood up saying that he was joking and that he was looking forward to the next match with the boys. Then all three raised their glasses and promised to meet at the college entrance exams. Meanwhile, a table was set on the roof of the hotel for the teachers, who were feasting under the open sky. One of the instructors, holding a glass of beer in his hand, said that it was good to finally stop looking after the students and get drunk. Master Shen stood up to make a toast and thank everyone for congratulating them on their victory. His colleagues rejoiced that he had introduced them to such a martial arts genius, and that now there was an opportunity to control the gates of heaven. But the other men at the table did not understand what was being said, and decided that the coach was simply drunk. But the teacher replied that he was sober and that there was no longer any point in hiding this information from others. Everyone present at the table tensed, not understanding what he was talking about. And the trainer began his story about how chi energy appeared, which enabled the masters to increase your combat effectiveness. But no one knows that 20 years ago a red moon appeared, and with it mysterious portals leading to other worlds. From these portals appeared strange creatures that even the best masters could not cope with. And all due to the fact that these passages were opened at the same time, and there were not enough fighters to resist. But over time the situation changed, and they were able to fight back. When these portals, nicknamed the Gates of Heaven, were stabilized, both sides could pass through them at any time. Therefore, to control this penetration, the crossings began to be guarded by military bases, and information about them was hidden. The teacher's colleagues could not believe their ears, and he continued by saying that the information about this first appeared in elite schools. But this month, it was decided to inform all other teachers, and then students. The coach saw the frightened faces of the men and said he understood their concern. But one of them clarified whether the red moon is really a sign of the appearance of portals, and a colleague confirmed this information. Then Master Shen pointed his finger at the sky, and the men turned their heads to see what he was pointing at. And everyone cried out in fright, seeing a huge red moon above them. At the same moment, Hao Din appeared in the air, the master who was opening the arena for the competition. He said that together with the red moon, the gates connecting the two worlds appeared. He also added that the students most likely also saw the red moon, and will have to tell them the whole truth earlier than planned. Then the man hovered in the air, in a lotus position, with closed eyes surrounded by some kind of energy. One of the teachers wanted to point out that this information was too dangerous, but another stopped him. The colleague quietly told him that the old master was now using the sky sensor to find out the information on the other side of the portal. Then the man thought in shock that such a skill could only be possessed by someone who had mastered the level of the heavenly realm. Then, without opening his eyes, the old man said that he had learned about everything, and that although the information was not enough, it was quite comprehensive. The man said that the other world is low grade and very small, and the strongest creature in it has the sixth skill level. The atmosphere allows ordinary people to be there as well. Then he looked up and firmly said that such a weak parallel world is a good opportunity for students to hone their skills. But the teachers protested, saying that they were ninth level and would not be able to penetrate that world to protect their students. Then the elder added that the world is only developing and the creatures in it are at best only the third level so far. He then turned around in the air and started walking away from the men, saying that the portal would stabilize in 30 minutes and that they would give the students the opportunity to choose whether or not to take this risk and not interfere with their choice. The teachers waved their hands, not knowing how to tell everything and explain to their wards what awaits them. 15 minutes after the teacher's conversation with the students, the boys were interested in the information, and some were confused and surprised. The trainer added that the portal is called the Gate of the Kingdom, and that it is the weakest of all known. But it is still very dangerous there, so the young men must decide for themselves whether to go there or not. All participants gathered in the hotel lobby, and the mentor gave them 15 minutes to think and make a choice. The young men began to consult with each other about their decisions. Many were afraid to go through the low level. Only the three leaders seemed calm. One of them was meditating. One was pushing himself, and another was drawing with both hands at the same time. The artist was able to depict an apple and a pencil on paper without expecting anything outstanding from his drawing. The second number was very calm, and thought to himself that it would be even calmer if it weren't for this guy with his strange drawings. Shen was just pressing on the little finger of one hand, and thought that the parallel world is not so terrible. He even knows a merchant from there. The young man with the killer system was happy to have such an opportunity to score more points, because he never managed to kill anyone at the competition. And Chijon thought to himself that if the heathen left, he would have to leave as well to protect his friends from him. At the end of the allotted time, the teacher returned and asked those present which of them decided to go after all. Van Po Chun and Xiao Chen shouted at the same time that they were ready to take part in this challenge. And then they went back to Shen and asked if he would go with them, and he thought that they were paying too much attention to him. But he decided that it would be strange if the winner did not agree, so he raised his hand like the first two. The teacher smiled as he said that the three of them would benefit from such practice. The guy with the killer system didn't care either and immediately agreed to go with the others. Chijan decided to join as well, especially after hearing that his potential enemy had gathered there. The instructor praised the young men for the courage with which they volunteered for this foray. Then, two more students joined in, a boy and a girl with a lower level. They also raised their hands, but the teacher noted that with their skills it would be too dangerous to go to another world. But the young man replied that he will reach the third level very soon, and the beauty said that she has pills, and if something goes wrong, she will simply run away. Then another teacher quietly told a colleague to let them go if they wanted to, and he, holding his head, agreed, telling them to behave carefully. At the specified time, teachers and students approached the portal where the director was already waiting for them. The trainer introduced them to the elders and said that the leader among them was Shen Qian. The man looked at them from under his forehead. Hao Din then said that the gate for the passage was ready and decided to explain the main missions to the students. The first task was to study the situation of the parallel world and to write down all the information in the book handed over by the director. The second task was to leave as many traces there as possible, and these words surprised the young men. Then he explained that they should share everything from their side that could develop the civilization of another world, whether it was writing or martial arts. The man added, recalling the butterfly effect, that only they would be able to float to a parallel world, and perhaps even completely change it. The young men asked if they would be able to implement these grandiose plans of Hao Din, and Hao Din answered in the affirmative. Then he looked at Van Po's leg and said that as many as were wounded, he would give them recovery pills, and the crippled youth had as many as two. The guy took one and immediately felt how the cast on his leg began to crack and fall off. Then the director announced that they would be in a parallel world for 4 months. Then the students got a little scared and asked why it took so long. But the elder replied that time in the other world flows differently, and their year is equal to 4 earthly months. Then the students calmed down a little. The girl who also volunteered to go asked if it would be better to take personal belongings and a change of clothes with her because they are going for a long time. Then she started snapping her fingers as she listed all the things she planned to take there with her, while the headmaster stood there, angrily looking at her. Then he couldn't stand it and shouted at the thief, saying that if necessary, they should use the natural resources they find there. The elder then explained that when they pass through the gates, they will disappear and reappear only after 120 days, after which they will be closed forever. And then asked to warn their families about their long-term absence, and the girl joyfully clapped her hands.